The stagecoach hit another rut in the dirt road, and Ethan Caldwell's head slammed against the wooden frame for the third time in an hour. His spectacles slid down his nose, smudged with the endless dust that seemed to coat everything west of the Mississippi. He pushed them back up with fingers that had never known calluses, never gripped anything harder than dental forceps, and certainly never belonged in a place like this. "You gonna puke again, city boy?" The voice came from across the cramped coach, a grizzled man named Harlan, whose beard looked like it housed an entire ecosystem. He spat tobacco juice out the window with practiced precision, his eyes never leaving Ethan's pale face. "I'm fine," Ethan managed, though his stomach disagreed violently. The morning's salt pork sat in his gut like a stone, and the relentless swaying of the coach wasn't helping. "Fine," Harlan snorted. "That's what the last tenderfoot said before he got himself scalped by Comanche. Found him 3 days later, screaming for his mama with his hair gone and his mind right behind it." The woman sitting next to Harlan, a weathered homesteader's wife named Ruth, jabbed him with her elbow. "Don't torment the boy, Harlan. He's scared enough without your ghost stories." "Ain't no ghost story if it's true." Ethan wanted to defend himself, to insist he wasn't scared, but the words died in his throat, because he was scared. Terrified, actually. Had been since the moment he'd stepped off the train in St. Louis 3 weeks ago and realized that everything he'd read about the frontier in those dime novels had been a romantic lie. The West wasn't noble. It wasn't clean. It was dust and danger and men who looked at him like he was already dead. "What's your business out here anyway?" Ruth asked, her tone gentler. "Don't see many dentists heading to the territories." "Opportunity," Ethan said, straightening his spine in a futile attempt to appear confident. "The frontier needs men of science, men who can bring civilization to—" Harlan's laughter cut him off like a knife. "Civilization. Boy, the only thing the frontier needs is men who can shoot straight and women who can cook what they kill. Your fancy tooth-pulling ain't gonna impress nobody out here." Heat crept up Ethan's neck. "Medicine is important everywhere, Mr. Harlan, even in uncivilized places." Uncivilized. Harlan tested the word like it tasted bad. "You hear that, Ruth? We're uncivilized." "Well, you certainly are," Ruth said dryly. "When's the last time you bathed?" Before Harlan could respond, the stagecoach lurched to a sudden stop. The driver's voice rang out from above. "End of the line, folks! Welcome to Redemption Crossing!" Ethan peered out the window and felt his heart sink. Redemption. Crossing wasn't a town. It was a collection of tents, half-built structures, and mud streets that looked like they'd swallow a man whole after a good rain. Rough-looking men stood in clusters, watching the stagecoach with predatory interest. A saloon, the only permanent structure he could see, leaned slightly to one side as if drunk on its own whiskey fumes. This was it. This was the place where he'd planned to establish his practice, to build a new life. "What have I done?" "Good luck, city boy," Harlan said as he climbed out. "You're gonna need it, son." The Frontier House Hotel was neither a house nor particularly hospitable, but it was the only place in Redemption Crossing that rented rooms. Ethan stood at the front desk, trying to ignore the suspicious stains on the wall behind the clerk. "That'll be $2 for the week," the clerk said without looking up. He was a thin man with a wandering eye that made it impossible to tell where he was looking. Payment up front. $2 was highway robbery, but Ethan knew better than to argue. He'd already learned that lesson when he'd tried to negotiate the price of his stagecoach ticket back in St. Louis. The agent had simply laughed and told him the next coach wouldn't leave for another month. He counted out the coins with shaking hands, hating how obvious his nervousness must be. "Room 3, upstairs. Don't leave nothing valuable lying around. We ain't responsible for theft." The clerk handed him a key that looked older than the building itself. "Breakfast is at 6. Miss it, and you don't eat." Ethan climbed the narrow stairs, his leather traveling case banging against his leg. The case contained everything he owned: his dental instruments, a change of clothes, his father's pocket watch, and a small leather journal where he'd been documenting his journey. He'd started the journal with grand ambitions of recording his transformation from civilized dentist to frontier pioneer. So far, the entries mostly consisted of complaints about digestive problems and mosquitoes. Room 3 was barely large enough for the narrow bed and rickety dresser crammed inside. A small window looked out over the main street, where Ethan could see men coming and going from the saloon, their voices carrying in the evening air. He set his case down carefully and sat on the bed, which creaked ominously under his weight. For a long moment, he just sat there, hands folded in his lap, trying to figure out what to do next. The plan had seemed so clear back in Boston. After his father's death, Ethan had inherited the dental practice along with substantial debts. The practice had been failing for years. His father had been too kind, too willing to treat patients who couldn't pay. When the creditors had come calling, Ethan had been faced with a choice: stay and slowly drown in debt, or head west where opportunity supposedly awaited any man brave enough to seize it. At the time, heading west had seemed like the brave choice. Now, it just seemed stupid. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. "Who is it?" "Room service." The voice was muffled through the thin wood. Ethan frowned. He hadn't ordered anything. Cautiously, he opened the door. The man standing in the hallway was not hotel staff. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and weathered by hard years. A revolver sat on his hip, and his hand rested casually on the grip. "Ethan Caldwell?" he asked. "Yes?" Ethan's voice came out as a squeak. "Name's Boone. I run security for the wagon train heading deeper into the territories. Heard you might be looking for passage." Yes, I am." Ethan tried to stand straighter, to project confidence he didn't feel. "I'm a dentist. I'm heading to establish a practice." Boone looked him up and down with an expression that suggested he'd found Ethan lacking. "A dentist?" "Right. Well, the train leaves in 3 days. Costs $50 for passage, supplies not included." $50? Ethan's voice cracked. "That's absurd." "That's the price." Boone's expression didn't change. "You got a problem with it, you can walk. But I'll tell you straight, a man like you wouldn't last 2 days alone out there." A man like you. The phrase stung because it was true. Ethan wasn't like these frontier men. He was soft, educated, completely unprepared for the reality of this harsh place. I'll need to think about it," Ethan managed. Boone shrugged. "You got 3 days? We leave at dawn on Sunday whether you're on the train or not." He turned to leave, then paused. "Bit of advice, city boy. Don't wander around after dark. Men go missing in Redemption Crossing, the kind of missing where they don't turn up again." Then he was gone, his boots heavy on the stairs. Ethan closed the door and leaned against it, his heart pounding. $50. He had barely 40 to his name, and he'd need money for supplies, for setting up his practice once he reached wherever he was going. He was already failing, and he'd been here less than an hour. The saloon was called the Lucky Strike, though Ethan suspected there was nothing lucky about it. He stood outside the swinging doors, trying to work up the courage to enter. Inside, he could hear laughter, the clink of glasses, the occasional shout, the kind of place his mother would have crossed the street to avoid. But he needed information. He needed to figure out how to survive in this place, and that meant talking to people, even if those people terrified him. Taking a deep breath, Ethan pushed through the doors. The interior was exactly what he'd expected, smoke-filled, dimly lit, and packed with men who looked like they'd kill you for looking at them wrong. A piano player hammered out an off-key tune in the corner, competing with a dozen different conversations. The air smelled of tobacco, whiskey, and unwashed bodies. Ethan made his way to the bar, trying to look like he belonged. The bartender, a barrel-chested man with arms like tree trunks, gave him a dismissive glance. "What'll it be?" "Whiskey, please." The bartender poured a generous shot and slid it across the bar. 2 bits. Ethan paid and took a careful sip. The liquid burned down his throat like liquid fire, and he fought not to cough. Behind him, he heard someone snicker. "First time drinking whiskey, boy?" He turned to find a group of men watching him with amusement. They were young, probably not much older than Ethan's 26 years, but they carried themselves with the easy confidence of men who knew their place in this world. "I've had whiskey before," Ethan lied. "Sure you have." The speaker was a lean man with a scar running down his left cheek. "You're that dentist, ain't you? The one asking about the wagon train." Word traveled fast in Redemption Crossing. "That's right. Let me guess," Scarface interrupted. "You're heading west to seek your fortune. Gonna bring civilization to the savages. Probably read about it in some book back east and figured it'd be easy money." His companions laughed, and heat crept up Ethan's neck. I'm trying to build a practice. There's demand for... Demand! The man slapped the bar, genuinely amused now. Boys, he thinks there's demand for dentistry out here. He leaned in close enough that Ethan could smell the whiskey on his breath. Let me educate you, city boy. Out here, when a tooth goes bad, you pull it yourself with pliers or you let it rot. Nobody's paying for your fancy services. That's not. And another thing. Scarface wasn't done. You got soft hands. I can tell just by looking at you. Soft hands, soft voice, probably never fired a gun in your life. Am I right? Ethan wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. He'd never held a gun, never even seen one fired outside of a shooting gallery at a county fair. That's what I thought. Scarface straightened up, his entertainment turning to something harder. See, the wagon trains going deeper into the territories, they don't take passengers who can't pull their weight. You'll be nothing but dead weight, and dead weight gets people killed. I can learn, Ethan said, hating how desperate he sounded. I'm educated. I can contribute. Educated. The word dripped with contempt. Your education don't mean shit when the Comanche are riding down on you. Don't mean shit when you're starving because you can't hunt. Don't mean shit when some outlaw decides he wants what you got and you don't know how to fight back. The saloon had gone quiet now, other patrons turning to watch the confrontation. Ethan felt dozens of eyes on him, judging him, finding him wanting. Maybe you should head back east, Scarface suggested, though his tone made it clear it wasn't really a suggestion. Before you get yourself killed. Or worse, get someone else killed trying to protect your useless ass. Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to defend himself, to prove these men wrong, to show them he was more than just a soft-handed city boy. But he wasn't. That was the horrible truth. Everything they were saying was right. He swallowed hard. I just want a chance. A chance? Scarface seemed to consider this. Then he smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. Tell you what, you beat me in a fight, right here, right now, and I'll personally recommend you to Boone. Hell, I'll even pay your passage. I don't want to fight you. That's what I thought. Scarface turned back to his companions. Coward and a fool. Deadly combination out here. The laughter that followed was the worst part. Not cruel laughter. That would have been easier to bear. This was dismissive. The kind of laughter reserved for something pathetic and harmless. Ethan set down his whiskey glass, his hand trembling, and walked out of the saloon. Behind him, the conversations resumed as if he'd never been there at all. Whoop-bong. Ethan spent the next day trying to figure out a solution to his impossible situation. He needed $50 for passage, but even if he had it, he was starting to doubt whether joining the wagon train was wise. Scarface had been cruel, but he hadn't been wrong. Ethan was completely unprepared for frontier life. Maybe the smart thing to do was turn back, admit defeat, return to Boston and face the creditors and the shame of failure. But that meant giving up on the dream. It meant accepting that he wasn't brave enough, strong enough, capable enough to make it out here. He was walking back to the hotel, lost in these dark thoughts, when he heard the commotion. A crowd had gathered near the general store. Ethan could hear shouting, the sound of a scuffle. His first instinct was to avoid it. Trouble in Redemption Crossing seemed like something to steer clear of, but curiosity won out. He pushed through the crowd and saw the source of the disturbance. A woman was fighting off two men who were trying to grab her. Not a saloon girl or a homesteader's wife. This woman was different. She wore riding clothes and boots, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. One of the men had a bleeding nose, and the other was nursing what looked like a kicked shin. "Get your hands off me," she snarled, her voice carrying a peculiar accent Ethan couldn't place. Not quite Southern, not quite Eastern. Something educated but hardened by experience. "Now, darling, don't be difficult," one of the men said, trying to grab her arm again. "You owe Mr. Patterson money, and he wants it today." "I don't owe Patterson anything. That was a fair card game, and you know it." "Mr. Patterson don't see it that way." The woman's eyes flashed with fury. "Then Mr. Patterson is a lying cheat, and you can tell him I said so." The man who'd spoken backhanded her across the face. The crowd gasped, but nobody moved to help. This was frontier justice. You minded your own business, unless it directly concerned you. Ethan didn't think. His body moved before his brain could catch up. "Stop!" He pushed through the last of the crowd, his heart hammering. "Leave her alone!" Both men turned to look at him. Up close, they were even more intimidating, hard-faced thugs who made their living through violence and intimidation. "This ain't your concern, boy," the one who'd struck the woman said. "I'm making it my concern." Ethan's voice shook, but he forced himself to stand his ground. "You can't just assault someone in broad daylight." "Can't we?" The man took a step toward Ethan. "Who's going to stop us? You?" Ethan realized with crystal clarity that he'd made a terrible mistake. These men were going to hurt him, possibly kill him, and nobody in this crowd was going to intervene. But before the situation could escalate, the woman's hand shot out and grabbed Ethan's arm. "Actually," she said, her voice suddenly sweet as honey, "he's my husband, and I'd appreciate it if you'd stop threatening him." Everyone froze, Ethan most of all. "Husband?" The thug looked between them suspiciously. "Since when?" "Since 3 months ago in St. Louis." The woman moved closer to Ethan, slipping her arm through his with practiced ease. "Isn't that right, darling?" Ethan's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. We... She squeezed his arm hard enough to bruise. "My husband is a dentist," she continued, her tone conversational. "He's joining the wagon train heading deeper into the territories. We both are, as a married couple. Now, if Mr. Patterson has a problem with me, he can take it up with Boone. I'm sure the wagon master would be very interested to hear that Patterson's men are harassing paying passengers." The mention of Boone seemed to give the thugs pause. They exchanged a glance, clearly recalculating. "This ain't over," one of them finally growled. "Tell your husband to watch his back." They melted back into the crowd, and the onlookers began to disperse, the show over. The woman released Ethan's arm and turned to face him properly for the first time. Up close, he could see she was striking rather than beautiful, sharp features, calculating green eyes, a small scar on her chin. She looked at him the way a predator might size up prey. "Thank you for the assist," she said, though that was monumentally stupid. You're welcome?" Ethan's brain was still trying to catch up. "Did you just tell those men we're married?" "I did, and unless you want to contradict me and get us both killed, you'll play along." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "Meet me at the livery stable in 1 hour. We need to talk." "About what?" "About the arrangement I just made for both of us. 1 hour, dentist. Don't be late." Then she was gone, striding away with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world for a single second. Ethan stood there, surrounded by the thinning crowd, trying to understand what had just happened. He'd come west to start a new life. Instead, he'd apparently acquired a wife. The livery stable smelled of horses and hay, a surprisingly pleasant scent after the general odor of Redemption Crossing. Ethan arrived early, nervous energy making it impossible to wait the full hour. He paced between the stalls, startling the horses, until the woman arrived. She moved silently. He hadn't heard her approach, and when she spoke, he nearly jumped out of his skin. "Skittish. That's going to be a problem." Ethan spun around. "You can't just sneak up on people like that." "I didn't sneak. You were too busy worrying to pay attention." She leaned against a support beam, studying him with those calculating green eyes. "What's your name, dentist?" "Ethan. Ethan Caldwell." "Mara Vance." She didn't offer her hand. "And before you ask, no, we're not really married. But as of now, everyone in Redemption Crossing thinks we are, and we're going to keep it that way." "Why?" "Because I need passage on that wagon train, and they don't take single women. Too much risk of trouble with the men, they claim. But married couples? They'll take married couples." Ethan's head was spinning. "So you want to pretend to be married to me so you can get on the wagon train?" "Exactly. That's insane. That's survival." Mara pushed off the beam and walked closer. "Look, Caldwell, I know what you are. You're a tenderfoot, fresh off the train from back east, in way over your head. You probably barely have enough money for passage, and even if you get on that wagon train, you'll be dead weight. Nobody respects you. Nobody trusts you. You're exactly the kind of liability that gets left behind when things get rough." Each word hit like a physical blow because they were all true. "But," Mara continued, "if you're married to me, suddenly you're more useful. I can shoot, hunt, track, and fight. I know the frontier, Having me as your wife gives you credibility you don't deserve but desperately need. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Passage west and a cover story. Win-win. Ethan wanted to refuse. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was a terrible idea, that Mara Vance was clearly dangerous and not to be trusted. But the alternative was going back to Boston in defeat. How long would this arrangement last? He asked. Until we reach Fort Resolution. That's where the wagon train ends. After that, we go our separate ways, and you never see me again. And if I refuse? Mara smiled, and it was not reassuring. Then I tell everyone you're a lying coward who tried to back out of marrying me. In a place like this, that kind of reputation gets you run out of town. Or worse. You'd do that? In a heartbeat. Her expression didn't change. I need this, Caldwell, and you need this. So stop overthinking it and make a decision. Ethan thought about his options. About the humiliation in the saloon, the impossible cost of passage, the certainty that he was completely unprepared for what lay ahead. He thought about his father, who'd always said that sometimes the only choice was between bad options and worse ones. Fine, he heard himself say. We'll do it, but I want your word that you won't abandon me once we're on the trail. You have my word, Mara said, and Ethan had no idea if she meant it. We're partners until Fort Resolution. Agreed? Agreed? They shook hands. Hers was calloused and strong, his soft and trembling. And Ethan Caldwell sealed a bargain with a woman he didn't know, didn't trust, and couldn't afford to lose. Well, the next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Mara appeared at Ethan's hotel room the morning after their agreement with a list of supplies they'd need and a brutal assessment of what he was doing wrong. Those clothes won't last a week on the trail, she said, eyeing his wool suit. You need practical gear, cotton shirts, canvas pants, sturdy boots. These are the only clothes I have. Then we'll get you new ones. My money's tied up, so you're paying. I don't have... You'll have to make it work. She crossed her arms. What about weapons? You know how to shoot? No. Of course not. She sighed like he was a particularly disappointing student. Fine. I'll handle the shooting, but you need to at least know how to load a rifle. We'll practice tonight. That evening, behind the livery stable, Mara attempted to teach Ethan the basics of firearm handling. It went about as well as expected. Hold it firmly, but don't strangle it, she instructed as he gripped the rifle like it might explode in his hands. And for the love of, stop closing your eyes when you aim. I can't help it. It's instinct. It's stupidity. If you close your eyes, you can't hit anything. After an hour of futility, Mara called it quits. We'll work on it on the trail. Just try not to shoot yourself. Or me. Despite the constant criticism, Ethan found himself grudgingly impressed by Mara's competence. She negotiated deals with merchants, secured their supplies at half the expected cost, and somehow convinced Boone to accept them as a married couple without asking too many questions. You're good at this, Ethan said after she'd talked a general store owner into selling them ammunition at a discount. I'm good at surviving, Mara corrected. There's a difference. On the night before they were set to leave, Ethan sat in his hotel room, writing in his journal by candlelight. His hands shook as he recorded the events of the past few days. I have made a bargain with a woman I barely know. Tomorrow, I board a wagon train heading into territory so dangerous that men like Scarface would rather insult me than see me die trying to cross it. I am pretending to be married. I cannot shoot straight, and I have never been more terrified in my life. But I'm going forward. Not because I am brave, but because going backward seems even more frightening. My father used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. I hope he was right, because tomorrow, I'm heading into the unknown, and I have no idea if I'll survive it. He closed the journal and extinguished the candle, lying in the darkness and listening to the sounds of Redemption Crossing settling into an uneasy night. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the real journey would begin. And Ethan Caldwell, soft-handed dentist from Boston, would finally learn what he was truly made of. Dawn broke cold and gray over Redemption Crossing. Ethan stood outside the hotel, his meager possessions packed into a traveling case that already looked inadequate for the journey ahead. Around him, the wagon train was organizing itself into a chaotic semblance of order. There were 12 wagons in total, each loaded with families, supplies, and desperate hopes. Children ran between the wheels while mothers shouted warnings. Men checked harnesses and weapons, their faces set with grim determination. These were people heading into the unknown, gambling their lives on the promise of a better future. Ethan had never felt more out of place. "There you are." Mara appeared at his elbow, dressed in practical riding clothes with a rifle slung across her back. "Stop looking like you're about to be executed and get your things. We're in Wagon 7. Wagon 7 belonged to a family named the Hendersons, a middle-aged couple with 2 teenage sons. They'd agreed to share space with the Caldwells in exchange for Ethan's promise to handle any dental emergencies that arose during the journey. Mrs. Henderson, a stout woman with kind eyes, greeted them warmly. "Welcome aboard. I'm Sarah, and this is my husband Tom. Those rascals over there are our boys, Matthew and Luke." The boys were tall and gangly, with the awkward energy of young men not quite grown into their frames. They eyed Ethan with barely concealed amusement. "Ma says you're a dentist," Luke said. "That's right. Can you really pull a tooth without it hurting?" "Well, there's always some discomfort, but—" "Luke, stop pestering Mr. Caldwell," Sarah interrupted. "Help load their things." As the boys hauled their supplies into the wagon, Boone rode up on a massive black horse. He surveyed the assembled train with the expression of a man who'd seen this routine 100 times and expected half of them not to make it. "Listen up," his voice cut through the morning chatter. "We're heading into hard country, Apache territory, outlaw country, land that doesn't forgive mistakes. You follow my orders exactly, or you don't follow at all. Anyone who can't handle that can turn back now." Nobody moved. "Good. We travel at dawn, rest midday when the sun's worst, camp at dusk. No stragglers, no complaints. If your wagon breaks down, you fix it fast or get left behind. If you're attacked, you defend yourself. This ain't a pleasure cruise. This is survival. Questions?" Ethan had about 1,000 questions, but Mara's warning glance kept him silent. "Then let's move out." The wagons lurched into motion, wheels creaking as they began the long journey west. Ethan climbed into Wagon 7, sitting across from Mara, while the Henderson boys drove from the front seat. Sarah and Tom rode horseback alongside the train, keeping watch. As Redemption Crossing disappeared behind them and the vast expanse of the frontier opened ahead, Ethan felt the enormity of what he'd undertaken settle over him like a heavy cloak. "You look like you're going to be sick," Mara observed. "I might be." "Don't. We've got weeks of this ahead." "Weeks?" The word came out as a groan. Mara actually smiled, a small, almost sympathetic expression. "Welcome to the frontier, Caldwell. Try not to die on day 1. The wagon rolled on, carrying them deeper into a land that had already proven it had no patience for fools, cowards, or soft-handed dentists who didn't know their place. Ethan watched the endless horizon and wondered, not for the first time, if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. But it was too late to turn back now. The journey had begun. The first 3 days on the trail taught Ethan more about suffering than his entire life in Boston had prepared him for. The wagon's constant jolting turned his spine into a column of fire. Dust coated everything: his clothes, his skin, his lungs. At night, he collapsed onto his bedroll, too exhausted to even remove his boots, while around him, hardened frontiersmen laughed and told stories, like the day's brutal march had been nothing more than a pleasant stroll. Mara, for her part, seemed perfectly at ease. She rode alongside the wagon on a chestnut mare she'd somehow acquired, her rifle across her saddle, scanning the horizon with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years reading danger in the landscape. "You need to drink more water," she told Ethan on the 3rd evening as he stumbled out of the wagon, his face pale and slick with sweat. "I'm fine." "You're not fine, you're dehydrated." She thrust her canteen at him. "Drink, and stop pretending you know what you're doing out here." He wanted to argue, but his pride had taken enough beatings. He drank, the lukewarm water tasting like salvation. "How do you know so much about this?" he asked, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Experience." Mara's eyes drifted to the darkening horizon. "I've crossed this territory before." "Why are you going back then? If you made it out once, why return?" Her expression shuttered closed, hard as granite. "That's not your concern, husband." The word dripped with sarcasm, a reminder that their arrangement was business, nothing more. Ethan had learned not to push when she got that look. Mara Vance had walls around her that made Redemption Crossing's defenses look flimsy by comparison. That night, as the wagons circled for camp, Boone called everyone together. The wagon master stood by the central fire, his weathered face grave in the flickering light. "We've made good time these first days, but starting tomorrow, we enter rougher territory. Apache hunting grounds, outlaw country. Every man needs to be armed and alert. We'll be posting double watches at night." "What about the women?" Sarah Henderson asked. She stood with her rifle cradled in her arms. Ethan had learned that frontier women were just as capable with weapons as the men, sometimes more so. "Women too," Boone confirmed. "Anyone who can shoot takes a watch. That includes you, Caldwell." Ethan's stomach dropped. I'm not very good with firearms." "Then you better get good fast." Boone's tone left no room for argument. "Mara, I'm assuming you can handle a rifle." "Better than most of your men," she said flatly. A few of the frontiersmen bristled at that, but nobody contradicted her. Mara had a way of carrying herself that suggested challenging her would be a mistake. "Fine. You take third watch with Thompson." "Caldwell, you're on first watch with young Henderson." Luke Henderson grinned at Ethan, all teenage bravado. "Don't worry, Mr. Caldwell. I'll make sure you don't shoot yourself in the foot." Laughter rippled through the group, and Ethan felt heat creep up his neck. Even here, thousands of miles from Boston, he couldn't escape being the joke. The watch rotation came too quickly. Ethan found himself standing at the edge of the circled wagons, rifle in hand, staring into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. Luke stood 20 yards away, relaxed and confident, occasionally whistling soft tunes between scanning the perimeter. Every sound made Ethan jump. The rustling of prairie grass became approaching enemies. The cry of a distant coyote transformed into a war party. His hands cramped from gripping the rifle too tightly, and sweat dripped down his back despite the cool night air. "You're wound tighter than a watch spring," Luke observed, materializing beside him. "Relax. If something's out there, being nervous won't help." "How can you be so calm?" "Practice. Been doing this since I was 12. The boy couldn't have been more than 16 now. First time's always the hardest. My hands shook so bad I dropped my rifle the first night I stood watch, but never let me forget it." Somehow, knowing even frontier-raised boys had been scared made Ethan feel marginally better. "What am I supposed to be watching for exactly?" "Movement where there shouldn't be any. Sounds that don't fit. Mostly, you trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is." They stood in companionable silence for a while, the vast frontier stretching endlessly around them. Above, stars blazed in impossible numbers, undimmed by city lights. Ethan had never seen the night sky look so alive. "Can I ask you something?" Luke said eventually. "Of course." "How'd you end up married to someone like Mrs. Caldwell? No offense, but she seems, I don't know, like she's seen things, hard things, and you seem soft?" Ethan supplied bitterly. "I was going to say different." Luke had the grace to look embarrassed. "She just don't seem like the type to marry a dentist, is all." Ethan scrambled for a believable story. "We met in St. Louis. She was working as a guide for frontier expeditions. I was looking for passage west. We spent time together, and—" He shrugged, hoping vagueness would pass for romance. "Must have been some courtship. It was sudden." That much was true, at least. Luke accepted this with the easy credulity of youth. They finished their watch without incident, and Ethan stumbled back to his bedroll, exhausted but oddly proud. He'd stood watch. He'd survived it. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. The next morning brought their first real test. They were making steady progress across a dry riverbed when one of the lead wagons hit a submerged rock and shattered an axle. The crack echoed across the plains like a gunshot, and the entire train ground to a halt. Boone rode back from the front, his expression thunderous. "How bad?" The wagon's owner, a homesteader named Collins, crawled out from under the wreckage. "Axles split clean through. It'll take hours to fix, maybe longer." "We don't have hours. This riverbed's exposed, and we're sitting targets." Boone looked around at the assembled travelers, his jaw tight. "Anyone here good with wagon repairs?" Silence. These were farmers, merchants, families seeking new lives, not wheelwrights or carpenters. I can help, Mara said, swinging down from her horse. You know wagon repair? I know enough. She was already rolling up her sleeves. But I'll need someone to help me lift the wagon while we work. Someone strong. Her eyes landed on Ethan, and his heart sank. Mr. Caldwell here is eager to contribute. Aren't you, husband? The way she said it left him no choice. Of course. What followed were 3 of the most grueling hours of Ethan's life. Under Mara's terse instructions, he helped leverage the wagon up while she and Collins worked beneath it, replacing the shattered axle with a spare. The wagon weighed what felt like several tons, and his arms screamed with the effort of keeping it elevated. Higher, Mara shouted from underneath. The angle's wrong. I can't. You can and you will. Push. He pushed, muscles burning, vision swimming. Beside him, Tom Henderson had joined the effort, his farmer's strength making the task look easier than it was. Almost there, Tom grunted. Just a bit more, son. Yeah, the sun stung. Tom was only perhaps 15 years older than Ethan, but he appreciated the encouragement. With a final desperate heave, they lifted the wagon high enough for Mara to slide the new axle into place. Got it, she called. Lower it down, slowly. They eased the wagon back to earth, and Ethan collapsed against the wheel, gasping. Every muscle in his body felt like it had been torn apart and poorly reassembled. Mara emerged from beneath the wagon, covered in grease and dirt, but with a satisfied expression. That'll hold until we reach the next settlement. Good work, Caldwell. The unexpected praise made his exhaustion worth it. Around them, other travelers nodded approval. He'd contributed something. For the first time since leaving Boston, he'd proven useful. We're losing daylight, Boone announced. Get moving. We need to clear this riverbed before dark. The wagons lurched back into motion, and Ethan hauled himself into wagon 7 with the last of his strength. Mara climbed in across from him, wiping grease from her hands with a rag. You did good back there, she said quietly, so only he could hear. I can barely move. That's how you know you're getting stronger. She studied him with those calculating green eyes. You're not completely useless, Caldwell. That's something. It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd gotten from her, and despite everything, it warmed something in his chest. Maybe he was adapting. Maybe he could survive this after all. That optimism lasted exactly 4 more hours. They were setting up camp for the night when the riders appeared on the horizon. Boone spotted them first, his hand immediately going to his rifle. Everyone inside the circle, now! The wagons were already circled, but people scattered for cover, grabbing weapons and children with equal urgency. Ethan stood frozen, watching the riders approach, his rifle hanging uselessly in his grip. There were 6 of them, moving at an easy canter, clearly unafraid. They wore a mix of frontier clothes and stolen military gear, their faces hard and weathered. Outlaws. Ethan knew it instinctively, the same way prey knows a predator. Stay behind me, Mara hissed, positioning herself between Ethan and the approaching riders. Her rifle came up smoothly, aimed but not threatening, yet. The riders stopped just outside rifle range. Their leader, a man with a thick black beard and a scar that split his lip, raised one hand in a mockery of peaceful greeting. Evening, friends. Fine camp you've got here. State your business, Boone called back, his own rifle trained on the speaker. Just passing through, same as you. Thought maybe we could share your fire, trade some stories. The bearded man's smile showed too many teeth. We're peaceful folk. Peaceful folk don't ride armed like that into another man's camp. These are dangerous lands. A man's got to protect himself. The outlaw's eyes scanned the circled wagons, counting people and weapons. We're not looking for trouble, just hospitality. You'll find neither here. Move along. The smile disappeared from the outlaw's face. Now that's downright unfriendly. See, the thing is, we've been riding hard all day and we're tired, real tired. Thought you might be willing to share some supplies, food, maybe a few valuables to ease our journey. I said move along. Boone's voice had gone cold as winter. While you still can. The outlaw leader laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. You got women and children in there. Men who probably can't shoot straight. You really want to test us, old man? I've got 20 rifles pointed at you right now, and every one of them's in the hands of someone who knows how to use it. You want to test that? The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Ethan could barely breathe, his heart hammering against his ribs. His finger brushed the trigger of his rifle, and Mara's hand immediately clamped down on the barrel, forcing it down. "Not yet," she whispered. "Wait for the signal." "What signal?" "You'll know it when—" The outlaw leader's hand dropped toward his pistol, and everything exploded into chaos. The first shot came from Boone, a warning shot that kicked up dirt inches from the leader's horse. The animal reared, and the rider fought for control. His companions scattered, drawing weapons, and suddenly the night was full of gunfire. Mara fired 3 times in quick succession, each shot deliberate and controlled. One of the outlaws jerked backward in his saddle, clutching his shoulder. Another's horse went down, throwing its rider. "Shoot!" Mara yelled at Ethan. "Shoot anything that moves!" Ethan raised his rifle, hands shaking so badly he could barely aim. He squeezed the trigger, eyes instinctively slamming shut. The recoil nearly knocked him on his back, and when he opened his eyes, he had no idea where his bullet had gone. Probably somewhere in the next county. "Keep your eyes open." Mara fired again, her face set in grim concentration. "And reload." "Reload, right." He fumbled with the rifle, his fingers clumsy with terror. Around him, the wagon train was a fortress of fire and fury. Sarah Henderson fired from behind a water barrel, her shots measured and precise. Tom and his boys worked their rifles like a well-oiled machine, providing covering fire. And Ethan? Ethan dropped half his ammunition in the dirt and nearly shot his own foot off trying to reload. The fight lasted maybe 3 minutes, an eternity compressed into heartbeats and gunfire. When the smoke cleared, the outlaws were retreating, dragging their wounded with them. The bearded leader shouted something that might have been a threat or a curse, his words lost in the thunder of hoofbeats. Then they were gone, swallowed by the darkness beyond the firelight. Boone lowered his rifle, his face grave. "Check for wounded, and someone get those fires out. They can see our position from miles away." Miraculously, nobody in the wagon train had been seriously hurt. A few grazes, some close calls, but nothing worse. The outlaws had taken the worst of it. Mara's shooting had seen to that. As people emerged from cover, shaking with adrenaline and relief, Ethan became aware that everyone was staring at him. No, not staring. Looking at him with something that might have been respect. "Did you see Caldwell?" Luke Henderson was saying to his brother. "Stood right up in the middle of the shooting, calm as anything." "Didn't even flinch," Matthew agreed. "Must take nerves of steel to just stand there like that." Ethan opened his mouth to correct them, to explain that he'd been frozen with terror, not calm with courage, but Mara's elbow dug sharply into his ribs. "Accept the compliment," she muttered. "You earned it." "I didn't do anything. You stayed in the fight." "That's more than some men manage their first time." She lowered her voice further. "And we need them to think you're capable. Trust me." Tom Henderson approached, clapping Ethan on the shoulder hard enough to nearly knock him over. "That was some fine shooting, son. Didn't know dentists could handle themselves like that." Thank you." The lie tasted wrong in his mouth, but Mara's warning glance kept him from confessing the truth. "Your wife's quite the shooter, too," Sarah added, smiling at Mara. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "Here and there," Mara said vaguely. "You pick things up on the frontier." As the camp settled back into its routine, guards posted, fires dampened, families checking on each other, Ethan found himself sitting by the wagon, his rifle across his knees, staring at nothing. He'd survived his first gunfight, sort of. He'd been absolutely useless, but somehow the legend of Ethan Caldwell, steady under fire, calm in chaos, had begun to grow. It should have made him feel better. Instead, it terrified him. Because legends had a way of getting people killed, and Ethan knew the truth. He was no gunslinger. He was a fraud who'd gotten lucky. And luck, on the frontier, had a way of running out. The days that followed blurred together into an exhausting rhythm of travel, camp, and watch. The encounter with the outlaws had shaken everyone, but it had also galvanized the wagon train into a tighter unit. People who'd barely spoken before now worked together, shared supplies, looked out for each other. And somehow, Ethan found himself included in that circle. Men asked his opinion on things he knew nothing about. Women smiled at him with genuine warmth. Children followed him around camp, asking about his adventures back east. The reputation he hadn't earned continued to grow, fed by misunderstanding and misinterpretation. "You're becoming popular," Mara observed one evening as they sat apart from the main fire. "People respect you." They respect a lie. Same thing, out here. She poked at the small fire they'd made, her expression thoughtful. On the frontier, what people believe about you matters more than what's true. You understand that, right? That doesn't make it right. Right and wrong don't mean much when you're trying to survive. Mara looked at him directly, her green eyes reflecting firelight. You want my advice? Stop worrying about being honest and start worrying about being useful. That's what keeps you alive. Before Ethan could respond, a commotion erupted near the center of camp. Voices raised in anger, the sound of a scuffle. They both stood, Mara's hand automatically going to her rifle. They found a crowd gathered around two men locked in a shoving match. One was Collins, the homesteader whose wagon they'd repaired. The other was a rough-looking man named Garrett who joined the train in Redemption Crossing. "Stealing from my supplies," Collins was shouting. "I counted my ammunition this morning and half of it's gone." "I didn't touch your damn bullets," Garrett shoved Collins back. "You probably miscounted, you paranoid fool." Boone pushed through the crowd, his voice cutting through the argument. "What's going on here?" Both men started talking at once, accusations flying. Other travelers chimed in, taking sides. The unity that had formed after the outlaw attack was fragmenting before Ethan's eyes. "Enough!" Boone's bellow silenced everyone. "Collins, you're saying Garrett stole from you?" "I know he did. He's been eyeing my supplies since we left Redemption Crossing." "That's a lie." "Then you won't mind if we search your wagon," Boone said quietly. It wasn't a question. Garrett's face flushed dark red. "This is an outrage. You can't just—" "I can and I will. Anyone on this train is subject to search if theft is suspected. Those are the rules." Boone gestured to two of his men. "Check his wagon. Now." The search didn't take long. Hidden beneath blankets in Garrett's wagon, they found not just Collins's missing ammunition, but supplies stolen from 3 other families. Dried meat, flour, medical supplies, all carefully hoarded away. The crowd's mood turned ugly. These were people who depended on their supplies for survival. Theft wasn't just wrong, it was potentially deadly. "Hang him!" someone shouted from the back. "He's a thief and a liar. Make an example." Boone raised his hands, calling for calm. "Nobody's hanging anybody. But Garrett, you're done. First settlement we reach, you're off this train. Until then, you travel on foot and you eat last. Understood?" Garrett's face twisted with rage and humiliation. "You'll regret this, old man. All of you will regret this." "Is that a threat?" Mara's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. She'd moved closer, her hand resting casually on her pistol. "Because making threats after being caught stealing seems like a poor decision." Garrett looked at her, at the steel in her eyes, and whatever he saw there made him back down. "No threat, just a fact." As Boone's men led Garrett away, the crowd began to disperse, muttering among themselves. Ethan noticed several people glancing at Mara with newfound wariness. She'd shown her dangerous side, and it had made them uncomfortable. "You didn't need to do that," Ethan said quietly as they walked back to their wagon. "Someone needed to. Boone's a good wagon master, but he's too soft sometimes. Men like Garrett need to see strength, or they get ideas. You scared people." "Good. Better they're a little scared of me than Garrett feels emboldened to cause more trouble." She stopped, turning to face him. "You don't understand how this works yet, Caldwell. Out here, reputation is currency. Fear is protection. The more dangerous people think you are, the safer you actually become." "Is that what you are? Dangerous?" Mara's smile was sharp as a knife. "What do you think?" That night, Ethan's watch rotation put him on guard with Mara. They stood at opposite ends of the circle, but she drifted over to his position after an hour, moving silently through the darkness. "You're getting better at staying alert," she said. "Your shoulders aren't up around your ears anymore. I'm still terrified every second. Fear keeps you sharp. It's overconfidence that gets you killed." She scanned the horizon, her profile sharp in the moonlight. "Can I ask you something, Caldwell?" "Of course. Why'd you really come west? And don't give me that line about bringing civilization to the frontier. Nobody believes that, least of all you." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, debating how much truth to share. But something about the darkness and the isolation of their watch made honesty seem safer. "I was running away," he admitted. "My father died and left me with debts I couldn't pay. I could either stay and slowly drown in Boston or come west and hope for a fresh start. It seemed brave at the time. Now it just seems stupid. It's both, Mara said. Most brave things are stupid if you think about them too hard. What about you? What are you running from? Her expression shuddered. Who says I'm running? Everyone's running from something out here. That's what the frontier is for. Second chances and fresh starts. He paused. Or revenge. Mara's head snapped toward him, eyes sharp. What makes you say that? The way you handle a gun. The way you move. You're not just comfortable with violence, you're looking for it. And earlier, with Garrett, you weren't protecting Boone. You were looking for an excuse to draw on someone. She was quiet for so long Ethan thought he'd overstepped. Then, softly, you're more perceptive than I gave you credit for. So I'm right? You're not wrong. Mara turned back to the darkness. But that's all you're getting. Some things stay private, even between fake spouses. They finished their watch in silence, but something had shifted between them. Not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Two people running from different pasts, temporarily allied in an uncertain present. When their relief arrived and they returned to the wagon, Ethan lay in his bedroll, staring up at the canvas roof. Outside, he could hear the prairie wind, the distant howl of coyotes, the soft sounds of the camp settling into sleep. He thought about Mara's words, about fear and courage, about the reputation he was building on accidents and misunderstandings, about the frontier's strange currency of perception and legend. And he thought about the fact that with each passing day, the person he'd been in Boston felt further away. That soft-handed dentist with his books and his polite society was becoming someone else. Someone harder, more capable maybe, or just better at pretending. He wasn't sure which was worse. The wagon train rolled on through increasingly harsh territory. The land grew rougher, water scarcer, the sun more brutal. They passed abandoned homesteads, grim reminders of dreams that had died in this unforgiving place. Sometimes they found graves. More often they found nothing but scattered possessions and unanswered questions. 3 weeks into the journey, they reached a narrow canyon that Boone said would shave 2 days off their travel time. The alternative was a longer route around, through territory known for hostile encounters. I don't like it, Mara said when Boone announced the plan. Canyons are natural ambush points. If someone wanted to hit us, that's where they'd do it. You got a better suggestion? Boone asked. Take the long way. 2 extra days is better than walking into a trap. With respect, Mrs. Caldwell, I've been leading wagon trains through this territory for 15 years. I know what I'm doing. Mara's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue further. As they prepared to enter the canyon the next morning, though, she double-checked her weapons and made sure Ethan did the same. If shooting starts, she instructed, you get behind cover and stay there. Don't try to be a hero. I wasn't planning to. Good. Because heroes out here end up dead, and I need you alive until we reach Fort Resolution. The canyon walls rose steeply on either side, red rock carved by ancient waters into twisting formations. The wagons had to proceed single file, wheels echoing off stone. It was beautiful in a hostile way, and absolutely the perfect place for an ambush. They were halfway through when the first shot rang out. The bullet struck the canyon wall above the lead wagon, sending chips of red stone cascading down like deadly rain. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The wagons, the people, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then chaos erupted. Ambush! Boone's voice boomed through the canyon. Get to cover! Return fire! More shots rang out from the canyon rim, muzzle flashes winking in the afternoon sun like deadly stars. The ambushers had positioned themselves perfectly, high ground on both sides, the wagon train trapped in the narrow passage below like fish in a barrel. Mara grabbed Ethan's collar and yanked him down behind a wagon wheel as a bullet whined past where his head had been a second before. Stay down! Don't move unless I tell you to! She was up and firing before he could respond, her rifle barking 3 times in rapid succession. Somewhere above, a scream cut short suggested at least one shot had found its mark. The Henderson boys had taken cover behind their wagon, working their rifles with practiced efficiency. Tom fired from behind a water barrel while Sarah shepherded the younger children into the dubious safety beneath the wagon beds. All around, the settlers who'd seemed like simple farmers and merchants were transforming into hardened defenders, their movements speaking to lives lived on the edge of violence. Ethan pressed himself against the wagon wheel, his rifle clutched uselessly in his hands. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. The world had narrowed to the deafening crack of gunfire, the acrid smell of powder smoke, the screams of wounded horses and the shouts of desperate men. "How many?" Mara yelled to Boone between shots. "Can't tell. At least a dozen, maybe more." The wagon master fired upward, his face grim. "They've got us pinned!" "It's the same group from before," someone shouted. "I recognize the bearded one." The outlaws had returned, and this time they'd brought friends. Ethan could see them now, shadowy figures moving along the canyon rim, using the rocks for cover as they poured fire down on the trapped wagon train. The bearded leader stood behind a boulder, directing his men with hand signals, his scarred face twisted in vindictive pleasure. "We're sitting ducks here," Tom Henderson called out. "We need to either push forward or retreat." "Can't retreat. They're behind us too," someone else yelled. Ethan risked a glance backward and saw it was true. More outlaws had appeared at the canyon entrance they'd passed through, cutting off any escape. They were completely surrounded, caught in a killing box with nowhere to run. "Mara," Ethan's voice cracked with panic. "What do we do?" She fired twice more before answering, her face set in hard lines. "We fight. There's nothing else." A scream rose from Wagon 4. Mrs. Patterson had been hit, blood blooming across her shoulder. Her husband dragged her beneath the wagon, his face white with terror and rage. "They're picking us off!" Luke Henderson's young voice carried a note of panic. "We can't stay here!" "Hold your positions," Boone commanded, but even his iron will couldn't change the mathematics of their situation. They were outnumbered, outpositioned, and running out of time. Then Mara did something insane. She stood up, fully exposed, and fired a series of rapid shots at the canyon rim. Not random fire. Each bullet was aimed with deliberate precision. 1, 2, 3 outlaws jerked backward, tumbling from their perches in sprays of red. "Mara, get down!" Ethan screamed. She ignored him, her movements fluid and controlled despite the bullets chewing up the ground around her feet. She was drawing their fire, making herself a target, and Ethan suddenly understood why. While the outlaws focused on Mara, others in the wagon train were repositioning, finding better cover, getting clear shots. It was a tactical sacrifice, using herself as bait to give everyone else a fighting chance. It was also going to get her killed. Ethan didn't think. His body moved on instinct, driven by something he didn't recognize in himself. He grabbed his rifle, stood up beside Mara, and fired blindly at the canyon rim. "What are you doing?" she snarled. "I told you to stay down." "If you're standing, I'm standing." The rifle bucked in his hands, and he worked the action clumsily, firing again. He had no idea if he was hitting anything, but that wasn't the point. The point was, she wasn't alone. For just a moment, Mara's hard mask cracked, and he saw something like surprise in her eyes. Then she was all business again, firing with deadly accuracy, while Ethan did his best not to shoot his own foot off. The outlaws' fire shifted, confused by this new development. Why were these two fools standing in the open? What kind of trap was this? Their hesitation lasted only seconds, but seconds were all Boone needed. "Now!" the wagon master roared. "Rush them!" Half the men broke from cover and surged forward, using the confusion to advance up the canyon. It was a desperate gambit, but desperation was all they had left. Tom Henderson led the charge with his boys flanking him, their rifles blazing. The outlaws on the forward rim found themselves suddenly under coordinated assault from below. Their advantage of high ground evaporated as bullets forced them to duck and scatter. 2 more went down, and the rest began to retreat. At the canyon's rear, the second group of outlaws saw their companions fleeing and made a critical mistake. They broke formation to pursue, trying to catch the settlers in a crossfire. Instead, they exposed themselves to Sarah Henderson and the other women who'd been waiting for exactly that opportunity. Sarah's first shot took the nearest outlaw in the chest. Her second caught another in the leg. The remaining attackers found themselves caught between 2 forces, their ambush turned against them. The bearded leader screamed orders, trying to rally his men, but it was too late. The wagon train had punched through their encirclement, and now the hunters had become the hunted. "Fall back!" the leader bellowed. "Fall back!" The outlaws scattered, abandoning their wounded as they fled into the badlands beyond the canyon. A few settlers gave chase, but Boone's sharp whistle called them back. "Let them go. We need to tend our wounded and get out of this death trap." The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving only the ringing silence of aftermath. Ethan stood there, swaying slightly, his rifle hanging from numb fingers. Around him, the canyon floor was littered with brass casings, blood, and the debris of violence. Did we? His voice sounded strange in his own ears. Did we win? We survived, Mara corrected, lowering her own weapon. Her hands were steady, but her eyes carried a weight that hadn't been there before. That's not the same thing. They'd lost 2 people, a young man named Cooper and an older woman named Mrs. Finch. 5 more were wounded, including Mrs. Patterson. As the settlers tended to their dead and injured, Ethan felt the full reality of what had just happened crash over him like a wave. He'd stood up in the middle of a gunfight. He'd fired at actual human beings with the intent to harm them. He might have killed someone. His hands started shaking uncontrollably. Come on, Mara said quietly, taking his arm. Let's get you sat down before you fall down. She guided him to a flat rock and pushed him onto it. His legs gave out gratefully, and he sat there staring at his trembling hands. I stood up, he said numbly. I stood up. Yes, you did. You also nearly got yourself killed, you idiot. But her voice lacked its usual sharp edge. Why did you do that? You were alone. I couldn't let you stand there alone. Mara crouched down in front of him, her green eyes searching his face. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. I haven't decided which. Probably both, Ethan managed. Probably. She stood, looking back at the scene of carnage. But the others saw it. They saw you stand with me, saw you fight when you could have hidden. You know what that means? That I'm insane? That you're a hero, again. She said it with a mixture of irony and something else. Maybe respect? The legend of Ethan Caldwell grows. Over the next hour, as the wagon train regrouped and prepared to push through the rest of the canyon, Ethan became aware of how people were looking at him, not with mockery or pity, but with genuine admiration. Word had spread. The dentist from Boston had stood up in the middle of a firefight, exposed himself to draw fire, and helped turn the tide of battle. None of it was quite true, but the truth didn't seem to matter. That was something, Mr. Caldwell, Tom Henderson said, clapping him on the back. Standing up with your wife like that takes real courage. Thank you. My boys saw what you did. They'll remember that. Shows them what real manhood looks like. Luke and Matthew Henderson approached shyly, their earlier cockiness replaced by something like awe. That was amazing, sir, Luke said. The way you just stood there, not even flinching. Oh, I was flinching, Ethan assured them. Trust me, I was terrified. But you did it anyway, Matthew pointed out. That's what makes it brave. Even Boone, who'd never shown Ethan much regard, came over as they prepared to move out. You've got sand, Caldwell. More than I gave you credit for. Your wife's lucky to have you. Mara, standing nearby, made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. They pushed through the rest of the canyon without further incident, the outlaws apparently having had enough of the wagon train's resistance. By the time they emerged onto open prairie again, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. That night's camp was subdued. They buried Cooper and Mrs. Finch under cairns of rocks, and Boone said a few words over them. The wounded were tended to, Mrs. Patterson's shoulder bandaged tightly by Sarah Henderson, who turned out to have considerable medical knowledge. Ethan volunteered to help with the wounded, his dental training giving him some understanding of anatomy and pain management. He cleaned wounds, helped set a broken arm, and did his best to keep people comfortable. It was something useful, something real, something he could actually contribute. You're good at this, Sarah observed as he carefully bandaged a deep cut on a man's forearm. Gentle hands make all the difference when someone's hurting. It's what I was trained for. Helping people, just usually with teeth. She smiled at that. Well, we're grateful for any help we can get. You and Mara both. She's quite a woman, your wife. Yes, she is. That, at least, wasn't a lie. Later, when the wounded had been seen to and the camp had settled into an uneasy rest, Ethan found Mara standing at the edge of the firelight, staring out at the darkness. You should be sleeping, she said without turning around. We've got another hard day tomorrow. So should you. I don't sleep much.
She finally looked at him, and in the dim light, she looked tired. Truly tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. Can't afford to let my guard down. Not even now. We're safe, relatively speaking. Safe is an illusion out here, Caldwell. You should know that by now. She paused, then added quietly, but thank you for what you did today. That was unexpected. You're welcome, though I'm still not sure why I did it. You did it because despite everything, despite being terrified and out of your depth, you're not a coward. She said it matter-of-factly, like stating an observable truth. You could have stayed behind that wheel. Nobody would have blamed you, but you didn't. I'm not brave, Mara. I don't know what I am. You're someone who stands up when it counts. That's rarer than you think. She turned back to the darkness. Get some sleep. I'll take first watch. Ethan wanted to argue, to insist on keeping her company, but exhaustion was pulling at him like a physical weight. He made his way back to the wagon and collapsed onto his bedroll, his body aching in places he didn't know could ache. Sleep claimed him almost instantly, dragging him down into dreams of gunfire and blood and green eyes that saw through every lie he'd ever told. The next week passed in a blur of hard travel and harder lessons. The encounter in the canyon had changed something in the wagon train's dynamic. They moved faster now, with greater urgency, knowing that danger could strike at any moment. Guards were doubled, weapons kept close, and the easy camaraderie of the early journey was replaced by a watchful tension. Ethan found himself genuinely contributing to the group's survival. His medical skills, limited as they were, proved valuable when people got sick or injured. He learned to handle a rifle with something approaching competence, though he'd never be the marksman people seemed to think he was. He helped repair wagons, tend livestock, and haul water from increasingly scarce sources. He was becoming useful. Actually useful, not just tolerated. The relationship between him and Mara was evolving too. They still maintained the fiction of being married, but the boundaries between pretense and reality were starting to blur. They worked together smoothly now, anticipating each other's movements, communicating with glances and small gestures. She still kept her secrets, and he kept his doubts about his own competence, but there was a foundation of trust building between them. It was Sarah Henderson who first voiced what others had been thinking. "You two make a good team," she said one evening as she watched Ethan and Mara working together to repair a torn wagon cover. "It's rare to see a couple so in sync." "We've learned to work together," Mara said carefully. "It's more than that. You trust each other. I can see it in how you move, how you communicate without words." Sarah smiled warmly. "My Tom and I took years to develop that kind of partnership. You're lucky to have found it." After Sarah left, Ethan caught Mara's eye. She looked away quickly, but not before he saw something complicated cross her face. "We're getting too good at this," she said quietly. "At what?" "At pretending, at being a couple." She said it like it was a problem, which maybe it was. "People are starting to really believe it." "Isn't that the point?" "The point is survival, Caldwell, not—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Just remember what this is. An arrangement. Nothing more." "Of course," Ethan said, trying to ignore the small sting her words caused. "Nothing more." But that night, as he lay in his bedroll, he found himself thinking about Mara in ways that had nothing to do with their business arrangement. Thinking about the way she looked when she smiled, rare as that was, the competence in every movement, the steel in her spine that had been forged by experiences she refused to talk about. He was starting to care about her. Actually care. Not just as a partner in survival, but as a person he wanted to know better. That was dangerous. Possibly more dangerous than the outlaws or the harsh frontier or any of the other threats they faced. Because caring meant being vulnerable, and vulnerability in Mara Vance's world seemed like a good way to get hurt. They reached a settlement called Miller's Rest 12 days after the canyon ambush. It wasn't much, a trading post, a blacksmith, a small saloon, and a handful of permanent structures surrounding a well. But after weeks on the trail, it looked like civilization. "We'll rest here for 2 days," Boone announced. "Get supplies, repair wagons, let the livestock recover, but stay alert. This close to the Badlands, trouble can find you anywhere." Ethan and Mara walked through the settlement, cataloging what supplies they needed. The trading post had decent stock, though the prices were criminal. "Highway robbery,"
Ethan muttered, looking at the cost of ammunition. Welcome to the frontier. Supply and demand in its purest form. Mara was examining a selection of knives with a professional eye. You need boots. Those you're wearing won't last another week. She was right. His Boston-bought boots were falling apart, the leather cracked and the soles separating. He found a pair that fit reasonably well and tried not to wince at the cost. As they were leaving the trading post, a man stepped into their path. He was tall and well-dressed by frontier standards, with a silver pocket watch chain and a clean hat. His face was weathered but intelligent, and his eyes held a calculating gleam that reminded Ethan unpleasantly of a professional card sharp. Mara Vance, the man said, smiling like he'd found a long-lost friend. Never thought I'd see you this far west again. Mara's entire body went rigid. Clayton. Been a long time. 2 years? 3? Clayton's smile didn't reach his eyes. Heard you left the agency. Decided to settle down with a dentist of all things? His gaze shifted to Ethan with obvious amusement. Quite a change from your usual type. What do you want, Clayton? Just making conversation with an old colleague, though I'm curious about your husband here. He extended a hand to Ethan. Clayton Pierce, I used to work with your wife before she retired. Ethan shook the offered hand, feeling tension radiating off Mara like heat. Ethan Caldwell, and Mara hasn't told me much about her previous work. Hasn't she? How mysterious. Clayton's smile sharpened. Well, your wife was one of the best operatives the Frontier Security Agency ever had. She tracked down more weapons smugglers and outlaws than anyone else in her division. We called her the Viper, quick, quiet, and absolutely lethal when she struck. The Viper. Ethan looked at Mara and saw her jaw clenched so tight it must have hurt. That's enough, Clayton. Is it? I'm just telling your husband about your distinguished career. Surely he deserves to know what kind of woman he married. Clayton leaned in conspiratorially. Did she tell you about the Massacre Creek incident? 20 outlaws dead in a single night. Or the Redstone Canyon operation where she single-handedly brought down a gun-running ring? I said that's enough. Mara's hand had moved to her pistol, and her eyes had gone cold as winter. Whatever you're doing here, it doesn't concern me. I'm out. Are you? Because I heard some interesting rumors. Rumors about a weapons smuggling operation running through this very territory. Large shipments headed to hostile tribes, enough firepower to start a war. Clayton paused, watching her carefully. Funny coincidence, you being on a wagon train heading right through the heart of it. Coincidence is all it is. Sure it is. Just like it's a coincidence that you suddenly got married and joined a wagon train 3 weeks ago, right when we got intelligence about the smuggler's route. Clayton's smile was sharp enough to cut. You're on a mission, Vance. Don't insult my intelligence by denying it. Ethan's world tilted sideways. A mission. Mara was on a mission. Their entire arrangement, the marriage, the wagon train, all of it was cover for some kind of operation? Who's we? Mara asked quietly. Last I checked, you got fired from the agency for taking bribes. People change. I've been rehabilitated. Clayton's expression hardened. And I've been assigned to this same operation, so like it or not, we're working together again. No. It's not optional. Orders from the top. You're investigating the smuggling ring, and I'm your new partner. He glanced at Ethan with barely concealed contempt. Unless you want to tell me your dentist husband is actually your real partner? The silence stretched taut and dangerous. Ethan stood there, feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. Everything he'd thought he knew about Mara, about their arrangement, about why she needed him, all of it was suddenly suspect. She wasn't just trying to get passage west. She was hunting weapons smugglers, and she'd used him as cover for it. Caldwell? Mara said carefully, not looking at him. Give us a moment. No. His voice came out harder than he'd intended. If this concerns our arrangement, I have a right to know about it. Clayton laughed. Oh, he doesn't know. This is better than I thought. Your cover marriage is actually one-sided? You're using him? Shut up, Clayton. Listen, did you tell him he's bait? That you married him specifically because a couple draws less attention than a single woman? That you're putting him in danger every day he's with you? Each word hit like a physical blow. Ethan looked at Mara, waiting for her to deny it, to explain,
to say something that would make this make sense. She didn't. "It's not," she started, then stopped, her face working through emotions Ethan had never seen there before. "It's complicated." "No," Ethan said quietly. "It's actually pretty simple. You lied about everything." "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you the whole truth." "That's the same thing." His voice was rising now, drawing attention from passers-by. "You used me. You put me in danger without telling me why. You let me think we were partners when I was just, what, cover? A prop in your investigation? You needed passage west. I provided it. That part was real. And the rest? The friendship? The trust? Was any of that real, or was I just too naive to see I was being played?" Mara's face went cold and hard, the walls slamming back into place. "You got what you wanted, Caldwell. You're on the wagon train. You're making your way west. People respect you now. What does it matter why I needed you?" "It matters because I trusted you." The words exploded out of him, raw and angry. "I stood up in a gunfight for you. I put my life on the line, and all of it was based on a lie." "Welcome to the frontier," Mara said flatly. "Nothing here is what it seems. I thought you'd learned that by now." Clayton watched their argument with obvious satisfaction. Trouble in paradise. How tragic. "Well, Vance, you can have your domestic dispute later. Right now, we have work to do. The smugglers are moving a shipment in 3 days, and we need to—" "I'm not working with you," Mara cut him off. "Then you're off the operation. I'll report back that you've gone rogue, compromised your cover, and endangered the mission. They'll pull you, Vance. You'll never work again." "Fine. Pull me." Clayton's eyebrows rose. "You'd give up the mission after everything you've sacrificed to get this close?" "I work alone. Always have." "Except you're not alone." Clayton gestured at Ethan. "You've got a liability here. A civilian who now knows about an active investigation. That's a security breach, Vance. You know what has to happen." The implication hung in the air, cold and terrible. Ethan felt ice slide down his spine. "You're not touching him," Mara said, her voice dropping to something deadly. "Then convince me he's not a threat. Work with me, complete the mission, and your dentist friend walks away clean." Clayton smiled. "Fight me, and I report him as a compromised asset. You know how the agency handles those." Mara's hand hadn't left her pistol. For a long moment, Ethan thought she might actually draw on Clayton, right there in the middle of Miller's Rest. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Then, slowly, deliberately, she released the gun. "Fine. We work together, but Caldwell stays out of it. He doesn't know anything, he's not involved, and you leave him alone." "Deal." Clayton tipped his hat mockingly. "Pleasure doing business with you, Vance. I'll be in touch about the details. Meanwhile, try not to let your fake husband get himself killed. It would be bad for morale." He walked away, leaving Ethan and Mara standing in the dusty street, the wreckage of their partnership scattered between them. "I need to think," Ethan said finally. I need to be alone." "Caldwell, don't." He held up a hand, surprised at how steady it was. "Just don't. Not right now." He walked away, leaving Mara standing there, her face an unreadable mask. Ethan found himself at the settlement's tiny cemetery, sitting on a wooden bench and staring at a row of rough markers. People who'd died chasing dreams in this harsh land. People who'd failed or been unlucky or simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He'd been such a fool, thinking he mattered to Mara, that they were building something real. She'd been using him all along, and he'd been too desperate for connection to see it. The worst part was understanding why she'd done it. She needed cover, and he'd needed passage west. It was a practical arrangement, nothing more. The fact that he'd started to care, started to see her as more than just a means to survival. That was his mistake, not hers. "Mr. Caldwell?" He looked up to find Sarah Henderson approaching, her face concerned. "Are you all right? People are saying you and Mara had some kind of argument." "We're fine," he lied automatically. "Just a disagreement." Sarah sat down beside him, folding her hands in her lap. "You know, Tom and I have been married 23 years, and in all that time, we've had plenty of disagreements, some of them real doozies." She smiled softly. "The thing about marriage is, it's work, real work. You have to choose each other every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Mrs. Henderson, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but that girl cares about you. Sarah said it with quiet certainty.
I've watched her these past weeks. The way she looks at you when she thinks nobody's watching. The way she puts herself between you and danger. That's not pretending, Ethan. That's real. You don't understand the situation. Maybe not. But I understand people. And I see two stubborn souls who are both so scared of being hurt that they're pushing each other away. She stood, patting his shoulder gently. Talk to her. Really talk to her. You might be surprised what you find. After Sarah left, Ethan sat alone with his thoughts, turning everything over in his mind. Mara had lied, but she'd also protected him, taught him, stood beside him when she could have abandoned him to his fate. She was using him, yes, but was that all it was? He thought about the way she'd looked when he'd stood up in the canyon firefight. The surprise in her eyes, quickly hidden. The quiet thank you afterward that had sounded like it cost her something to say. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe there was more to this than simple use and manipulation. Or maybe he was just a fool, seeing what he wanted to see. As the sun began to set, painting Miller's Rest in shades of amber and shadow, Ethan made a decision. He stood, brushed the dust from his pants, and went to find Mara. He found her at the edge of the settlement, checking her weapons with methodical precision. She looked up as he approached, her expression guarded. "I'm sorry," they both said at the same time. A beat of surprised silence, then Mara continued. "I should have told you the truth from the beginning. About the mission, about why I needed you. You deserve to know what you were getting into." "I'm sorry for assuming the worst," Ethan said, "and for walking away like that. It was childish. It was deserved." She set down the rifle she'd been cleaning. "Clayton was right about some things. I did use you as cover, and I did put you in danger without your full knowledge. That was wrong. But you also saved my life, multiple times, and you taught me how to survive out here." Ethan sat down on a nearby rock. "I need you to be honest with me now. All of it. What's this mission? Why are you really here?" Mara was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. Then, slowly, she began to talk. "There's a weapons smuggling ring operating through this territory. They're selling rifles, ammunition, and explosives to hostile tribes and outlaw gangs. Enough firepower to destabilize the entire frontier. The agency's been trying to shut them down for 2 years, but they're careful. They use wagon trains as cover, hiding weapons in legitimate shipments, using civilians as unwitting mules. And you think this wagon train is carrying weapons? I know it is. I've seen the manifests, tracked the shipments. Somewhere in these wagons, hidden in someone's supplies, there are rifles being transported to a rendezvous point near Fort Resolution." Ethan's mind raced. "Who? Which wagon?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out. It could be anyone, a family that doesn't know their flour barrels have false bottoms, a merchant who's being paid to look the other way. Even Boone himself could be involved." She looked at him directly. "That's why I needed cover. A lone woman asking too many questions would have been suspicious. But a married couple? Nobody thinks twice about a couple. And now Clayton's involved. Clayton's a snake. He was fired from the agency for corruption, and if he's back, it means someone powerful is pulling strings." Mara's face hardened. "I don't trust him. Never have." "Do you trust me?" The question hung between them. Mara met his eyes, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked uncertain. "I'm starting to," she said quietly. "Which scares me more than you know." "Why?" "Because trust gets you killed out here. It makes you hesitate, makes you vulnerable. It's safer to rely only on yourself." She paused. "But you keep doing things that make me want to trust you anyway. Like standing up in that canyon. Like not running away when you found out the truth today. Like being here now, asking questions instead of just leaving." Ethan thought about that. About trust and vulnerability and the risk of caring about someone in a place that seemed designed to crush such feelings. "I'm not leaving," he heard himself say. "Whatever this mission is, whatever danger we're facing, I'm in, fully, no more half-truths." "You don't know what you're saying. This could get you killed." "Everything out here could get me killed. At least this way, I'm choosing the danger." He managed a weak smile. "Besides, you need me, remember? I'm your cover." "Caldwell. Ethan, if we're really doing this, really partnering up, then you should use my first name." Mara looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "All right, Ethan." The sound of his name in her voice did strange things to his chest. "But if we're doing this, we do it my way. You follow my lead, you tell me everything you see and hear, and you don't take stupid risks unless I tell you to." "Agreed, on one condition." "What?" "No more lies. Between us, at least. I don't care what we tell everyone else, but when it's just us, I need the truth." She extended her hand. "Deal." They shook on it, and this time it felt like something more than business, like they were sealing a real partnership built on honesty instead of pretense. "So what now?" Ethan asked. "Now we find those weapons before Clayton does, because if he gets to them first, I guarantee they'll disappear into his pockets instead of being confiscated." Mara stood retrieving her rifle. "And we have 3 days before the smugglers make their move, which means we have 3 days to figure out who on this wagon train is a traitor." Ethan stood too, feeling the weight of what he'd just committed to. 3 days to unmask a smuggler. 3 days before everything came to a head. 3 days to prove that Ethan Caldwell, soft-handed dentist from Boston, could be more than just dead weight on the frontier. The game was changing, the stakes rising, and for the first time since leaving Redemption Crossing, Ethan felt like he was choosing his own path instead of stumbling blindly down it. He just hoped that choice wouldn't get them both killed. The investigation began at dawn the next morning. Mara had drawn up a list of suspects, essentially everyone on the wagon train, and assigned Ethan the role of friendly observer while she did the real detective work. His job was to talk to people, be his usual harmless self, and report anything unusual. "You're good at making people comfortable," Mara had explained as they'd planned their approach. "They see you as non-threatening. Use that." "So I'm bait again." "You're an asset. There's a difference." She'd almost smiled. "Besides, you wanted to be a real partner. This is what real partners do." Ethan started with the Hendersons, figuring they were the least likely suspects, but also the most observant family on the train. He found Sarah preparing breakfast over their campfire, her efficient movements speaking to years of frontier life. "Morning, Ethan," she greeted him warmly. "You and Mara patched things up?" "We talked. It helped." He accepted the cup of coffee she offered. "Can I ask you something? Have you noticed anyone acting strange lately? Anyone spending unusual amounts of time with their cargo or being secretive about their supplies?" Sarah's brow furrowed. "That's an odd question. Why do you ask?" Ethan had prepared his cover story. "Mara's worried about thieves. After what happened with Garrett, we're both a bit paranoid about our belongings." "Understandable." Sarah thought for a moment. "Well, Collins has been mighty protective of his wagon since we repaired it. Won't let anyone help him load or unload. But that could just be him being particular." "Anyone else?" "The Pritchard family keeps to themselves more than most. And that merchant, Morrison, he's always counting his inventory, checking his wagon at odd hours." She shrugged. "But on a wagon train, everyone's protective of their goods. We're carrying everything we own." Ethan thanked her and moved on, filing away the information. Collins, the Pritchards, Morrison, all worth investigating further. Over the course of the morning, he worked his way through the camp, making casual conversation, asking innocent questions, observing. Most people were exactly what they appeared to be: families seeking new lives, merchants hoping for profit, farmers looking for better land. But a few stood out. Morrison, the merchant, was indeed obsessive about his cargo. His wagon was packed with trade goods, bolts of cloth, tools, preserved foods, and he personally supervised every item that went in or out. When Ethan offered to help him move some heavy crates, Morrison had refused almost violently. "I appreciate the offer, but I handle my own merchandise. No offense, Caldwell, but I've got a system." "None taken. Just trying to be neighborly." Collins was similarly protective, though his paranoia seemed more generally directed. He'd been suspicious of everyone since the theft incident with Garrett, which made sense. But he also made multiple trips to check his wagon throughout the day, sometimes in the middle of the night. The Pritchard family, a middle-aged couple with 3 young daughters, were quiet and reserved, speaking only when spoken to. They kept their wagon canvas tightly closed, even in the heat, and Mr. Pritchard always positioned himself between his family and anyone who approached. Ethan reported his findings to Mara that afternoon as they pretended to gather firewood outside the camp. Morrison's definitely hiding something, Mara said, but it might just be valuable merchandise. Same with Collins. The Pritchards. She trailed off thoughtfully. Families make good covers. Nobody suspects parents with children. You really think they'd use their own daughters as cover for smuggling? I've seen worse. Her expression was hard. People do terrible things for money, Ethan. Never forget that. What about Boone? You said he could be involved. I've been watching him. He's clean, as far as I can tell. Been running this route for years with a spotless record. She kicked at a fallen branch. But that could be part of the cover. The perfect wagon master nobody would suspect. This is impossible. It could be anyone. That's why we need to narrow it down. Tonight we search the wagons. Ethan's eyes widened. We can't just break into people's property. We're not breaking in. We're conducting a security sweep. Mara's tone made it clear this wasn't up for debate. You'll keep watch while I search. If anyone asks, we're checking for signs of the outlaws, making sure they didn't plant anything in the wagons during the canyon ambush. That's actually a clever cover story. I've done this before, remember? She met his eyes. Can you handle it? Keeping watch, I mean. If someone comes, you need to stall them. I can handle it. Good. We start after midnight, when everyone's asleep. The hours until midnight crawled by with agonizing slowness. Ethan tried to act normal during the evening meal, but his nerves were singing with anticipation. He caught Mara's eye across the fire once and saw the same focused intensity he'd come to recognize as her mission face. Clayton Pierce appeared just as people were settling in for the night, his presence like a stone dropped in still water. He made a show of chatting with various travelers, his easy charm working its magic, but Ethan noticed how his eyes constantly tracked back to Mara. Your friend seems interested in you, Ethan muttered to her as they prepared their bedrolls. Clayton's interested in the mission. I'm just part of it. But her jaw was tight. He's going to be a problem. Can we trust him? We can trust him to look out for himself. Beyond that, she shook her head. Just stay away from him, Ethan. Men like Clayton are dangerous because they're smart and selfish, a bad combination. Midnight came with a whispered wind across the prairie. Ethan lay in his bedroll, pretending to sleep until he felt Mara's hand on his shoulder. They rose silently, moving like ghosts through the sleeping camp. They started with Morrison's wagon. While Ethan stood watch, Mara slipped inside, her movements quick and practiced. Ethan's heart hammered as he scanned the darkness, every shadow a potential threat. 5 minutes felt like hours. Mara emerged, shaking her head. Trade goods. All legitimate. But there's something off about the weight distribution. The wagon's heavier than it should be for what's visible. False bottoms? Maybe. We'd need more time to check properly. She moved toward the next target. Keep watching. They searched 3 more wagons over the next hour. Collins's wagon held farming equipment and family possessions. The Pritchards' wagon was cramped with their belongings and the detritus of family life. Nothing suspicious. A trader named Jacobs had a wagon full of furs and hides, all apparently legitimate. They were approaching wagon 8, belonging to a quiet man named Stevens who kept to himself, when Ethan heard footsteps. Someone's coming, he hissed. Mara disappeared into the shadows instantly, moving with liquid grace. Ethan forced himself to stay calm, to look like he had a legitimate reason to be wandering the camp at this hour. Clayton Pierce stepped into view, his face barely visible in the starlight. Caldwell, out for a midnight stroll? Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd check the perimeter. Ethan tried to sound casual. What about you? Same. Clayton's smile was knowing. Where's your wife? Sleeping. Really? Because I could have sworn I saw 2 people moving through the wagons just now. Clayton stepped closer, his hand resting on his pistol. You 2 searching for something? I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Clayton's eyes swept the area, clearly looking for Mara. Here's some free advice, dentist. When you're conducting a covert search, don't do it in pairs. 1 searcher, 1 lookout. It's too obvious. Better to... The cold press of a gun barrel against the back of Clayton's head stopped him mid-sentence. Mara had materialized behind him like smoke. Better to what? She asked softly. Please, continue. I'm fascinated by your expertise. Clayton raised his hands slowly, his expression more amused than alarmed. Touchy, Vance. I was just offering professional advice. We don't need your advice. Or your interference. She didn't lower the gun.
What are you doing out here? Following you, obviously. You're not subtle as you think. He glanced back at her as much as the gun barrel allowed.
Find anything interesting? That's not your concern. Actually, it is. We're supposed to be working together, remember? Or are you planning to hoard all the glory for yourself when you crack this case? There's no glory in this, Clayton. There's only... A scream cut through the night, sharp and terrified. All three of them froze, the tension of their confrontation momentarily forgotten. The scream came again, this time accompanied by shouting. The entire camp was waking up, people stumbling from their bedrolls, calling out in confusion and fear. "Fire!" someone yelled. "The wagons are on fire!" Ethan turned and saw flames licking up the side of Wagon 4, the Patterson wagon. The fire was spreading fast, feeding on the canvas and dry wood. "Get water!" Boone's voice boomed across the camp. "Form a line, move!" The camp exploded into organized chaos. People grabbed buckets, forming a chain from the water barrels to the burning wagon. Ethan found himself in the middle of the line, passing bucket after bucket, his arms burning with effort. The fire was fierce, fighting their efforts with hungry determination. Mr. Patterson was trying to get to his wagon. His wife was still recovering from her gunshot wound and couldn't move quickly, but the heat drove him back. "Sarah's in there," he screamed. "Someone help her!" Without thinking, Ethan broke from the line and ran toward the burning wagon. He heard Mara shout his name, but he didn't stop. Sarah Patterson needed help, and everyone else was focused on fighting the fire. The heat hit him like a physical wall. Smoke stung his eyes and choked his lungs. He pulled his shirt up over his nose and mouth and pushed forward, climbing into the wagon's rear entrance. Inside was hell. Flames crawled across the canvas ceiling, dropping burning debris. Sarah Patterson lay on a bedroll, her shoulder bandaged, her face pale with pain and terror. "Mr. Caldwell," her voice was weak. "I can't move. My shoulder." "I've got you." Ethan hooked his arms under hers and lifted, his muscles screaming in protest. She cried out as the movement jarred her injured shoulder, but he couldn't afford to be gentle. The wagon was coming apart around them. He dragged her toward the opening, stumbling over burning blankets and scattered possessions. A support beam cracked above them, and he threw himself forward, half carrying, half dragging Sarah through the exit, just as the beam crashed down where they'd been seconds before. Hands reached for them. Tom Henderson and his boys pulling them both clear. Ethan collapsed on the ground, coughing violently, his lungs full of smoke. Someone pressed a water skin to his lips, and he drank gratefully. When his vision cleared, he saw the wagon fully engulfed, beyond saving. But the bucket line had created a wet barrier around it, preventing the fire from spreading to other wagons. The camp was saved, even if the Patterson wagon was lost. "You damn fool," Mara said, kneeling beside him. Her face was smudged with soot, her eyes bright with something that might have been tears or might have been smoke irritation. "You could have died." Sarah needed help. There were other people who could have... She stopped, shaking her head. "Never mind. You're an idiot, but you're a brave idiot." Sarah Patterson was being tended to by others, her husband clutching her hand like he'd never let go. She caught Ethan's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." And despite the pain in his lungs and the burns on his hands, he felt the gesture was worth it. Boone gathered everyone once the fire was finally out, his face grave in the flickering light of the dying flames. "Anyone have any idea how this started?" "It was deliberate," Clayton said, emerging from the darkness. He held up a broken oil lamp. "Found this near the wagon. Someone doused the canvas with lamp oil and lit it." Murmurs of shock and anger rippled through the crowd. Deliberate arson? On a wagon train where everyone depended on each other for survival? "Who would do such a thing?" Sarah Henderson demanded. "Someone trying to create a distraction," Mara said quietly, her eyes meeting Ethan's. He understood immediately. While everyone was fighting the fire, someone could have moved contraband, hidden evidence, or accomplished any number of covert tasks. "Or someone trying to destroy evidence," Clayton added. "Mrs. Patterson, did your wagon contain anything unusual? Anything someone might want destroyed?" Sarah Patterson, still recovering from her rescue, shook her head weakly. "Just our belongings, clothes, food, my husband's tools." "Nothing out of the ordinary," Mr. Patterson confirmed. "We're simple people. We don't have anything worth burning a wagon over." But Ethan saw something flicker across Clayton's face, a look of calculation that suggested he knew more than he was saying. The rest of the night passed in tense wakefulness. Guards were tripled, and nobody slept well. Ethan lay in his bedroll, his mind racing through possibilities. The fire had been a distraction. He was sure of it. But for what? And set by whom? At first light, Mara shook him awake. "Get up. We need to talk. Now." They walked to the edge of the camp where the prairie grass whispered secrets in the morning breeze. Mara's face was hard with suppressed anger. "While you were playing hero last night, I searched the Patterson wagon before the fire destroyed it completely. And I found something, hidden in a false bottom of their water barrel, rifles. 6 of them, new manufacture, expensive, the kind that tribes and outlaws would pay a fortune for." Ethan's stomach dropped. The Pattersons are the smugglers? Were. Past tense. Mara's jaw clenched. The fire was set to destroy the evidence after someone tipped them off that we were searching wagons. By the time I found the rifles, they were already half melted by the heat, useless as evidence. So we lost them. Worse than that. Whoever's running this operation knows we're investigating. They know we're getting close, and they're willing to sacrifice an entire shipment to protect their identity. She kicked at a rock, sending it skittering across the dirt. The Pattersons were just mules. Probably didn't even know they were carrying contraband. The real smuggler is still out here, still hidden. Could it have been Clayton? Maybe he set the fire to destroy evidence before we could find it. It's possible. But Clayton's too smart to destroy valuable merchandise. He'd want to steal it for himself, not burn it. Mara's eyes were distant, calculating. No, this was someone else. Someone who values secrecy over profit. So what do we do now? Now we go to Fort Resolution. The rendezvous point is there. The smugglers will have to make their move when we arrive. It's our last chance to catch them. She looked at him directly. But Ethan, this just got a lot more dangerous. They know we're hunting them. They'll be watching us, waiting for a chance to eliminate the threat. You mean eliminate us? Yes. She didn't sugarcoat it. If you want out, now's the time. I can get you to the fort safely, and you can go your own way. No judgment, no shame. You didn't sign up for this level of danger. Ethan thought about it, really thought about it. He could walk away, end this fake marriage, leave Mara to her mission, and pursue his original dream of establishing a dental practice somewhere civilized. But that dream seemed hollow now. The man who'd left Boston was gone, replaced by someone harder, more capable, more alive. Someone who'd stood in gunfights, saved people from fires, and partnered with a dangerous woman on a dangerous mission. Someone who, if he was honest with himself, was falling for that dangerous woman despite all the reasons he shouldn't. "I'm staying," he said firmly. "We're partners, real partners. That means we see this through together." Something shifted in Mara's expression, a crack in her armor that let him glimpse the vulnerable person beneath. "You're going to get yourself killed, you know that?" "Maybe, but at least I'll die doing something that matters." He managed a smile. "Besides, you need me. I'm your cover, remember? You're more than that now." She said it so quietly, he almost missed it. Then louder. "All right, we stick together, but you follow my lead, and when I say run, you run. Understood?" "Understood." They shook hands on it, and Ethan felt the weight of the commitment settle over him. 3 days to Fort Resolution. 3 days to identify a smuggler willing to kill to protect their secret. 3 days to survive. The wagon train broke camp that morning and pushed hard for Fort Resolution. The loss of the Patterson wagon had shaken everyone's confidence, and people moved with the nervous energy of prey sensing a predator nearby. Ethan spent the day observing, watching for any sign of suspicious behavior. Morrison was agitated, constantly checking his wagon. Collins was withdrawn, barely speaking to anyone. The Pritchards remained insular, their wagon canvas still tightly closed. But it was Boone who drew Ethan's attention. The wagon master had been increasingly stressed, snapping at people, making uncharacteristic errors in judgment. When they stopped for the midday rest, Ethan saw Boone slip away from the camp, moving toward a small rise in the distance. "Mara," Ethan whispered, nodding toward the departing wagon master. "Look." They followed at a distance, using the terrain for cover. Boone climbed the rise and stood there for several minutes, scanning the horizon. Then, to Ethan's shock, he pulled out a small mirror and began flashing signals. reflected sunlight in a pattern that was clearly deliberate.
He's signaling someone, Mara breathed. Son of a... Boone's the contact.
They watched as Boone finished his signals and started back toward camp. Mara grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him down behind a boulder. We can't confront him yet. We need proof, and we need to know who he's signaling. Her mind was clearly racing through possibilities. Tonight, we follow him. If he leaves camp again, we see where he goes. What if Clayton's already figured this out? What if he's planning his own move? Then we beat him to it. Mara's smile was sharp and dangerous. Because this is my mission, and I'm not letting that corrupt bastard steal it from me. The day dragged into evening, and evening into night. Ethan took first watch, positioning himself where he could see Boone's bedroll. Mara rested nearby, but he knew she wasn't really sleeping. Her hand never left her pistol. Around midnight, Boone stirred. He sat up slowly, looked around the camp, then rose and walked toward the horses. He moved quietly, but not quietly enough to escape notice from two people specifically watching for him. Ethan and Mara followed on foot, staying low, using the darkness as cover. Boone took one of the horses and rode out, moving at a steady trot toward the southeast. We need horses, Ethan whispered. No time. We'll lose him if we stop to saddle up. Mara broke into a run and Ethan followed, his lungs burning as he tried to keep pace. They ran for what felt like miles, following the sound of hoofbeats. The moon was bright enough to see by, casting long shadows across the prairie. Finally, the hoofbeats stopped, and they slowed to a cautious walk. Ahead, Ethan could see a small campfire. Voices carried on the night air. Boone's, and another he didn't recognize. They crept closer, staying low, until they could see the camp clearly. Boone stood next to the fire, talking to three men on horseback. And there, illuminated by the flickering flames, Ethan saw the face of the bearded outlaw leader from the canyon ambush. Next shipment arrives at the fort in 2 days, Boone was saying. We'll make the exchange then, same as always. What about the investigators? The bearded man asked. You said there were federal agents on your train. They're handled. The fire destroyed the evidence, and they're chasing ghosts now. By the time they figure out what's really happening, we'll be long gone with the merchandise. You better be right, Boone. The boss don't like complications. There won't be any. Trust me. Ethan felt Mara tense beside him. They'd found their smuggler, but they were 2 unarmed people against 4 armed men, miles from camp with no backup. We need to get back, Mara breathed. Get help. Arrest Boone before... A twig snapped under Ethan's foot, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet night. Everyone at the campfire turned toward them. For a frozen moment, nobody moved. Then Boone's hand dropped to his pistol. Run! Mara screamed. They ran. Bullets kicked up dirt around their feet as they sprinted into the darkness. Ethan's lungs burned, his legs pumped, his heart threatened to explode from his chest. Behind them, he could hear horses being mounted, men shouting, the thunder of pursuit. Split up, Mara yelled. They can't chase both of us. I'll lead them away. You get back to camp and tell Clayton what we found. I'm not leaving you. That's an order, Caldwell. Go! She veered left, firing her pistol to draw attention. The horsemen followed her, their muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. Ethan wanted to follow, wanted to help, but he knew she was right. Someone had to get back, had to warn the others. He ran toward where he thought the camp was, his sense of direction scrambled by fear and darkness. He ran until his legs gave out, until he collapsed in the grass, gasping for air, his sides aching like they'd been stabbed. He lay there, listening for sounds of pursuit, but heard nothing. The prairie was silent except for the wind and his own ragged breathing. Mara was out there somewhere, alone, possibly captured or killed. And he'd left her. The thought made him want to vomit. But she'd been right. Splitting up had been the smart tactical move. The only move that gave them both a chance of survival. He forced himself to his feet and started walking, using the stars to navigate. He had to get back to camp. Had to tell Clayton. Had to organize a rescue party for Mara. Had to hope he wasn't too late. The walk back took hours. By the time the wagons came into view, dawn was breaking across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Ethan stumbled into camp, his clothes torn, his face scratched by prairie grass, his body pushed beyond exhaustion. Help, he croaked. Need help. Mara's in trouble. People rushed toward him. Clayton appeared, his face sharp with questions. The Henderson family emerged from their wagon, their expressions alarmed. "What happened?" Clayton demanded. "Where's Vance?" "Boone," Ethan gasped out. "He's the smuggler. We followed him. They saw us. Mara led them away so I could get back. We need to find her. We need to—" His legs finally gave out completely, and the world tilted sideways. Strong hands caught him before he hit the ground. "Get him water," someone commanded. "And someone find Boone. Now!" But when they searched the camp, Boone was gone. His horse, his weapons, all his possessions vanished like smoke. And somewhere out on the prairie, Mara Vance was alone with men who wanted her dead. Ethan had failed her, despite all his growth, all his newfound courage. When it had mattered most, he'd run away while she faced danger alone. The thought was unbearable. He struggled to his feet, pushing away the hands trying to help him. "We have to find her. We have to go now." "You can barely stand," Clayton said. "You're in no shape to—" "I don't care." The words exploded out of him, raw with desperation and guilt. "She's out there because of me, because I made noise and gave us away. I'm not sitting here while she—" "Caldwell." Clayton's hand landed on his shoulder, surprisingly gentle. "I know what she means to you. I can see it. But getting yourself killed won't help her. Let me handle this. I know how these smugglers operate. I can track them. Then I'm coming with you." "No. You're staying here, resting, and letting the professionals work." Clayton's voice hardened. "That's not a request." Ethan wanted to argue, but exhaustion and pain finally overwhelmed him. His vision swam, and the world faded to black as his body simply shut down from the strain. When he woke, the sun was high in the sky, and Sarah Henderson was sitting beside him, applying cool cloths to his forehead. "Easy," she murmured as he tried to sit up. "You've been out for hours. Your body needed the rest." "Mara?" His voice was hoarse. "Did they find her?" Sarah's expression told him everything he needed to know before she spoke. Clayton took a search party out at first light. They found signs of a struggle about 3 miles southeast, blood on the ground, spent shell casings, but no Mara, no bodies. She squeezed his hand gently. "They're still looking, Ethan. Don't give up hope." But hope felt like a luxury he couldn't afford, because deep in his gut, Ethan knew the truth. Mara Vance had been taken, and the clock was ticking on her survival. Ethan lasted exactly 2 hours before defying Clayton's orders. He couldn't sit in camp, couldn't rest, couldn't do nothing while Mara was in danger. Every minute he waited was a minute she might be suffering, might be dying, might be calling for help that wouldn't come. He found Tom Henderson checking his rifle near the Henderson wagon. "I need your help," Ethan said without preamble. "I'm going after Mara, and I need someone who can actually track and shoot." Tom looked at him with those steady farmer's eyes, measuring. "Clayton said you were to stay put." "Clayton's not my boss, and he's been gone for hours with no word. I can't wait anymore." "Son, you can barely walk. You're in no shape to—" "I don't care what shape I'm in." Ethan's voice cracked with desperation. "She's out there because of me, because I made a mistake and she sacrificed herself to fix it. I can't just sit here. I won't." Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he called over his shoulder. "Luke, Matthew, saddle 4 horses. We're going hunting." Sarah appeared in the wagon entrance, her face concerned. "Tom, is this wise?" "Probably not, but it's right." He looked at his wife with something deep and unspoken passing between them. "This boy's willing to die for the woman he loves. I remember that feeling, remember being that young and desperate." He turned back to Ethan. "We'll go. But you follow my lead, do what I say when I say it, and if things go sideways, you don't play hero. Agreed?" "Agreed." The Henderson boys brought the horses, their young faces set with determination. Luke handed Ethan a rifle. "You're getting better with this," the boy said, "but try to keep your eyes open when you shoot this time." Despite everything, Ethan almost smiled. They rode southeast, following the trail Clayton's search party had taken. Tom moved with the easy competence of someone who'd been reading the land since childhood, pointing out signs Ethan would have missed: disturbed grass, a scuff mark in the dirt, a piece of torn cloth. "3 horses came through here," Tom said, dismounting to examine the ground. "Moving fast, carrying weight, 2 riders on 1 horse maybe." He straightened, his face grim. "Blood trail's fresher here. Whoever was bleeding is still bleeding." Ethan's stomach clenched. How much blood? Enough to be worrying, not enough to be fatal. Yet. Tom swung back into his saddle. Trailheads toward the Badlands. Rough country. Lots of places to hide. They've got a camp out there. Finding it won't be easy. They pushed on as the sun climbed higher, the temperature rising until the air shimmered with heat. The prairie gave way to broken country, rocky outcroppings, dry creek beds, twisted formations of red stone that looked like the bones of some ancient beast. Matthew spotted the first sign of human presence, a smudge of smoke against the sky, thin and barely visible. "Campfire," he said, pointing. "Maybe 2 miles ahead, in that canyon system." "Could be them. Could be anyone." Tom considered their options. "We approach careful. Scout it first before we do anything stupid." They left the horses tied in a sheltered ravine and proceeded on foot, weapons ready. The smoke led them to a narrow canyon entrance, barely wide enough for a wagon. Tom signaled for silence as they crept forward, using the rocks for cover. The canyon opened into a small basin, and there, in the center, was a camp. 4 men lounged around a fire, their horses picketed nearby. Ethan recognized the bearded outlaw leader immediately. Next to him sat Boone, looking nervous and out of place among the hardened criminals. And there, tied to a wagon wheel, hands bound behind her back and blood crusted on her temple, was Mara. Ethan's vision narrowed to a tunnel focused entirely on her. She was alive. Hurt, but alive. Relief and rage flooded through him in equal measure. Tom's hand on his shoulder brought him back to tactical reality. 4 against 4, the farmer whispered. "Not great odds, but we've got surprise. Luke, Matthew, you two circle around to the north side. Caldwell and I will take the south. On my signal, we open fire. Aim for the ones with guns drawn first." "What about Mara?" Ethan asked. "She's right in the line of fire." "Trust me, your wife's tougher than she looks. The second shooting starts, she'll know to get down." Tom's confidence was absolute. "Everyone ready?" The boys nodded, already moving into position. Ethan checked his rifle with shaking hands, trying to remember everything Mara had taught him about shooting. "Keep your eyes open. Breathe steady. Squeeze. Don't pull." He could do this. He had to do this. They moved into position, and Tom raised his hand, preparing to give the signal. But before he could drop it, Mara's voice rang out across the canyon, sharp and mocking. "You're all idiots, you know that?" The outlaws turned to look at her. The bearded leader laughed. "Big talk from a woman tied to a wheel." "I'm just saying, you had a good thing going. Boone runs the wagon trains. You intercept the shipments, everyone makes money. But you got greedy, started killing people, drawing attention." Mara shifted against her bonds, wincing. "Now you've got federal agents all over this territory, and it's only a matter of time before they track you down." "Federal agents like you?" The leader stood, walking toward her with predatory slowness. "You were supposed to be the problem, but now you're just leverage." "Leverage for what?" "Your partner, that Clayton fellow. He's already made contact, offered to trade, you for a cut of the operation." The bearded man smiled. "See, he's smart, knows when to cut his losses and join the winning team." Mara's laugh was bitter. "Clayton would sell out his own mother for profit. But if you think he'll honor any deal with you, you're stupider than you look." The slap echoed across the canyon, snapping Mara's head to the side. Ethan nearly rose from cover right then, rage overwhelming sense, but Tom's iron grip held him down. "Not yet," Tom breathed. "Wait for it." The bearded leader grabbed Mara's chin, forcing her to look at him. "Here's what's going to happen. Clayton's bringing us the rest of the weapons from the wagon train. In exchange, we let you go. Then we disappear, and everyone wins. Except the people you've killed, the families you've destroyed." Mara's green eyes blazed with defiance. "I won't let you get away with this. You're not in a position to stop anything, sweetheart." "Maybe not. But he is." She wasn't looking at the outlaw leader. She was looking directly at the rocks where Ethan was hiding, her eyes locking with his for just a moment of recognition, of trust, of something deeper that made his heart stutter. Then she smiled. "Now would be good," she shouted. Tom's hand dropped, and the canyon erupted in gunfire. Ethan rose from cover and fired, his bullet catching the bearded leader in the shoulder. The man spun, cursing, reaching for his pistol. Tom's rifle barked twice, and 2 more outlaws went down. From the north side, Luke and Matthew opened up with their own weapons. The outlaws scattered, diving for cover, returning fire. Bullets sparked off rocks inches from Ethan's head, and he ducked, working the rifle's action with fumbling fingers.
He rose again, fired, missed, rose again, fired, and this time heard a scream that suggested he'd hit something. Mara had thrown herself flat against the wagon wheel, using it as cover while she worked at her bonds. Ethan saw her get one hand free, then the other. She grabbed a pistol from the belt of a fallen outlaw and came up shooting. The tide turned instantly. Now it was 5 guns against 3, and the outlaws were caught in a crossfire. Boone tried to run for the horses, but Mara's bullet caught him in the leg. He went down screaming. The bearded leader made one last desperate stand, firing wildly as he backed toward the canyon entrance. Tom Henderson's rifle spoke with calm authority, and the outlaw crumpled, clutching his chest. Sudden silence fell, broken only by the moans of wounded men and the ringing in Ethan's ears. "Clear," Tom called out. "Everyone all right?" "We're good," Matthew called back. Ethan was already running toward Mara, his rifle forgotten. She turned as he approached, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Then she was in his arms, and he was holding her like she might disappear if he let go. "You came for me," she said into his shoulder. "You absolute idiot, you came for me." "Of course I came for you. Did you think I'd just leave you?" "Most people would have." Her voice was muffled against his shirt. "Most smart people." "Then I guess I'm not that smart." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. The cut on her temple was still bleeding, and bruises were forming on her jaw. "You're hurt." "I've had worse." But she swayed slightly, and he realized she was running on pure adrenaline and stubbornness. "We need to secure the prisoners. Get Boone talking before—" A gunshot cracked across the canyon. They both turned to see Clayton Pierce standing at the canyon entrance, a smoking pistol in his hand. The bearded outlaw leader lay dead, a fresh bullet hole in his forehead. "Couldn't let him live," Clayton said calmly, holstering his weapon. He knew too much about too many operations. Would have complicated things. "You son of a—" Mara started forward, but Ethan held her back. "Easy. He's got the drop on us." It was true. Clayton stood with perfect positioning, his hand resting on his pistol, his eyes calculating. Tom and his boys had lowered their rifles slightly, caught off guard by the newcomer. "You sold us out," Mara said flatly. "You were working with them all along." "Working with them? Please, I was using them, same as I'm using you." Clayton smiled his charming smile, but his eyes were cold. "See, I realized something when they fired me from the agency. The real money isn't in stopping criminals, it's in managing them, taking a cut, keeping things organized, making sure everyone profits. You're a traitor. I'm a businessman. There's a difference." He gestured at the canyon around them. "This operation? It's just one piece of a larger network. Weapons, contraband, information, all flowing through channels I control. Boone was useful, but sloppy. These outlaws were muscle, nothing more. But you, Vance, you're the real prize." "How's that?" "Because you're going to help me. You're going to use your reputation, your skills, your connections to expand the operation. With you running interference, we could triple our profits within a year." Clayton's smile widened. "And before you refuse, consider this. I've got men positioned around the wagon train right now. One signal from me and they start killing civilians. Women, children, the whole lot." The threat hung in the air, ugly and real. Ethan felt Mara tense beside him, her mind clearly racing through options. "You're bluffing," she said. "Am I? You want to test that theory? Risk all those innocent lives on your certainty?" Clayton shook his head. "I don't think so. You're too good of a person for that, Vance. It's always been your weakness. You care too much." "And that's your weakness," a new voice said from behind Clayton. "You assume everyone else is as selfish as you are." Clayton spun, but he was too slow. Sarah Henderson stood there with her rifle leveled at his head, her face set with frontier steel. "Drop the gun, Mr. Pierce, or I'll drop you." "You won't shoot me? You're a mother, a decent woman." Sarah pulled the trigger. The bullet kicked up dust inches from Clayton's boot. Her next shot was already chambered, the barrel now pointed directly at his chest. "I'm also a woman who's crossed this frontier 3 times and buried 2 children along the way," she said quietly. "So don't tell me what I will or won't do. Now drop the gun." Clayton dropped it. Tom and his boys moved in quickly, securing Clayton with the same rope that had held Mara. Boone was dragged over, blubbering promises and pleas that fell on deaf ears. "How many men do you really have at the wagon train?"
Mara demanded, pressing her pistol against Clayton's temple. None. It was a bluff. He laughed bitterly. But it almost worked, didn't it? You were actually considering it. Not for a second. But Ethan saw her hand shake slightly. She had been considering it, had been weighing the lives of innocents against her principles. That was the difference between her and Clayton. She cared. Even when it hurt, even when it made things harder, she cared. Ethan stepped forward. We need to get everyone back to the wagon train, get the wounded treated, the prisoners secured. He looked at Clayton. And figure out how much of the agency is compromised. Smart boy, Clayton sneered. There's a reason they fired me quietly instead of prosecuting. Too many important people taking their cuts. You bring me in, and I'll sing like a canary. Name names, expose operations. The whole Frontier network comes crashing down. Good, Mara said. Let it crash. Maybe something better can be built from the wreckage. They rounded up the prisoners and began the trek back to the wagon train, moving slowly to accommodate the wounded. Mara rode beside Ethan, her face pale but determined. Thank you, she said quietly, for coming after me, for not giving up. You would have done the same for me. Maybe. Probably. She glanced at him, something vulnerable showing through her usual armor. But most people wouldn't have. Most people would have cut their losses and moved on. I'm not most people. No, you're really not. She reached over and took his hand, squeezing it once. Ethan Caldwell, you're either the bravest or stupidest man I've ever met. You've said that before. Have you decided which yet? Both. Definitely both. But she smiled when she said it, a real smile that transformed her entire face. They reached the wagon train as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of fire. The settlers rushed out to meet them, their faces showing shock and relief as they saw the prisoners being led in. Boone, someone said in disbelief. Boone was behind it? Boone and Clayton both, Mara confirmed, along with a network of corrupt agents and officials. But it's over now. The smuggling operation is finished. The celebration that followed was muted by exhaustion and the recognition of how close they'd all come to disaster. But there was relief, too. Relief that the danger had passed, that the traitors had been caught, that they could continue their journey without looking over their shoulders. Sarah Henderson organized the wounded care, while Tom and some other men secured the prisoners in one of the wagons. Mara sat by the fire, letting Mrs. Patterson clean and bandage her wounds while Ethan hovered nearby like an anxious mother hen. I'm fine, Mara insisted for the 5th time. Head wounds bleed a lot. It looks worse than it is. You were tied up and beaten. That's not fine. I've had worse, she repeated. Then, seeing his expression, but I appreciate the concern. It's nice, having someone to worry about me. Later that night, after the camp had settled into uneasy sleep with double guards posted, Ethan found Mara sitting at the edge of the firelight, staring into the darkness. Can't sleep? He asked, settling down beside her. Never could. Not after... She trailed off, then seemed to make a decision. Not after missions. The adrenaline takes time to fade. Is that what this was? Just another mission? Mara was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost hesitant, a tone he'd never heard from her before. It started that way. You were cover, nothing more. A means to an end. She looked at him, her green eyes reflecting firelight. But somewhere along the way, it became something else. You became something else. What did I become? Someone I care about. Someone I trust. Someone who makes me think maybe I don't have to do everything alone. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. You terrify me, Ethan Caldwell. You make me feel things I thought I'd buried years ago, things that get you killed in my line of work. Ethan's heart was hammering, but he kept his voice steady. So what do we do about that? I don't know. I've never been good at this part. Mara turned to face him fully. The mission's over. Fort Resolution is 2 days away. Once we get there, our arrangement ends. We go our separate ways, just like we agreed. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. What's practical? What's safe? Mara. He took her hand, feeling the calluses and scars that mapped her history. Is that what you want? She looked down at their joined hands, her expression working through a dozen emotions.
No, it's not what I want. But I don't know how to do this. How to be with someone without it being tactical, without it being cover for something else. I don't know how to just be.
Then we'll figure it out together. No cover story, no mission, just two people trying to build something real. He squeezed her hand gently. If that's what you want. It scares me. It scares me too, but I've learned something these past weeks. The things worth doing are usually scary, and you're definitely worth the fear. Mara looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then slowly she leaned in and kissed him. It was gentle, tentative, nothing like the fierce warrior he'd come to know. It was vulnerable and real and perfect. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. Ethan Caldwell, soft-handed dentist from Boston, what have you done to me? Same thing you did to me. Changed everything. They sat together by the fire, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. The frontier stretched endlessly around them, full of danger and promise in equal measure. But for the first time since leaving Boston, Ethan felt like he'd found what he'd been searching for. Not a fresh start, not an escape, but a partner. Someone who saw him not as he'd been, or as he pretended to be, but as he actually was, flawed and frightened and trying his best, and someone he saw the same way in return. 2 days later, Fort Resolution rose from the prairie like a promise kept. It wasn't much. Wooden walls, a few permanent buildings, the familiar chaos of frontier commerce. But to the wagon train, it represented the end of a long and dangerous journey. The settlers dispersed to their various destinations, families heading to their homesteads, merchants to their trades. The Hendersons were staying in the area, planning to claim land about 20 miles south. "You're welcome to visit any time," Sarah said as they prepared to depart. "Both of you. I have a feeling you will be sticking together."
"We're going to try," Mara confirmed, glancing at Ethan with an expression that was almost shy. Tom shook Ethan's hand firmly. "You came west a tenderfoot, but you're leaving a frontiersman. That's something to be proud of." "I had good teachers." "And you were a good student, eventually." Tom grinned. "Take care of that wife of yours. She's something special." "She really is."
After the Hendersons left, Ethan and Mara stood in the fort's courtyard, surrounded by their meager belongings. Clayton and Boone had been turned over to the military authorities, along with detailed reports of the smuggling operation. It would take months, maybe years, to root out all the corruption, but the work had begun. "So," Mara said, "what now?" "I was going to ask you the same thing. I'm done with the agency. That life, it's not for me anymore. Too much betrayal, too much compromise." She looked around the fort, considering possibilities. "Maybe I'll try being a normal person for a while. See how that feels." "Any idea what normal people do on the frontier?" "Not really. You?" Ethan thought about his original plan, establishing a dental practice, bringing civilization to the wilderness. It seemed naive now, almost laughable. But the core desire was still there, to help people, to build something useful. "I heard they need a doctor here," he said. "The fort surgeon is overwhelmed, and there are settlements springing up all around. People need medical care." "You're a dentist, not a doctor." "I know enough to help, and I can learn the rest." He smiled. "I've gotten pretty good at learning on the job." "That you have." Mara considered it. "So you'd set up practice here, stay in Fort Resolution?" "Maybe, if I had a reason to stay." "Like a business partner. Someone who knows the territory, can handle security, keep the rougher elements in line?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes were anything but. "That would be one reason, though I was thinking more along the lines of something more personal." "How personal?" "The kind where we stop pretending to be married and consider actually doing it for real. Eventually, when we're ready." Ethan felt his face heat. "If that's something you'd even want." Mara laughed. The sound genuine and warm. "Ethan Caldwell, are you proposing to me?" "Not yet, maybe someday. Right now I'm just suggesting that we figure out what this is between us without a mission getting in the way." "I like that plan." She stepped closer, taking both his hands in hers. "But fair warning, I'm terrible at domestic life. I can't cook, I don't clean, and I'll probably always sleep with a gun under my pillow. And I'm terrible at frontier life. I still can't shoot straight, I'm scared of half the wildlife, and I'll probably always jump at loud noises. Sounds like we're perfect for each other. Sounds like we're both disasters. Well, maybe two disasters together make something whole. Mara kissed him, right there in the middle of Fort Resolution's courtyard, not caring who saw. When they broke apart, Ethan felt something settle in his chest, not the anxious fear that had driven him west, but something calmer, something like peace. "So we're really doing this?" he asked. "We're really doing this, whatever this is?" Mara grinned. "Besides, someone needs to keep you alive out here. Might as well be me. My hero. Don't you forget it." They set up shop in a small building near the fort's eastern wall. Ethan hung a shingle outside. Caldwell Medical Services, Dentistry and General Care. Mara established herself as his partner and security consultant, which was a polite way of saying she handled anyone who caused problems. The first months were hard. Ethan struggled with cases beyond his training, frantically reading medical texts and consulting with the fort surgeon. Mara struggled with staying in one place, with building a life instead of hunting targets. They argued, compromised, learned each other's boundaries and breaking points. But they also laughed, built something real, became known in Fort Resolution as the odd couple who'd somehow made it work. The former agent and the dentist turned doctor, partners in business and life. Word of their work spread. Settlers came from miles around for treatment. Mara's reputation as someone who could handle trouble kept the more unsavory elements away. They made friends, earned respect, became part of the community's fabric. 6 months after arriving at Fort Resolution, on a clear autumn evening with the first hint of winter in the air, Ethan asked Mara to marry him properly. Not for cover, not for convenience, but because he couldn't imagine his life without her in it. She said yes before he'd even finished asking. They married in the fort's small chapel, with the Hendersons traveling in for the ceremony. Sarah cried happy tears, and Tom gave Ethan advice about marriage that boiled down to listen more than you talk and never go to bed angry. The wedding was simple, attended by the settlers and soldiers who'd become their community. Ethan wore his only good suit, somehow preserved through the journey. Mara wore a simple dress borrowed from Sarah, her usual weapons conspicuously absent for perhaps the first time since he'd met her. When they exchanged vows, Ethan looked into Mara's green eyes and saw his entire future reflected there. Not the future he'd planned when leaving Boston, safe, predictable, civilized. But something better. Something earned through hardship and fear and choosing each other again and again. "I love you," he said, the words feeling inadequate but true. "You terrifying, dangerous, impossible woman. I love you." "I love you too," she replied, her voice steady and sure. "You brave, foolish, wonderful man. You changed my life. You changed mine first. Let's call it even." They kissed, and the small crowd erupted in cheers. Outside, the frontier stretched endlessly, full of dangers and opportunities in equal measure. But Ethan Caldwell no longer feared it, because he'd learned the secret that all frontier survivors knew. You didn't conquer the wilderness. You found someone to face it with, someone who made you stronger, braver, better than you'd ever been alone. The dentist from Boston had come west looking for a fresh start and found so much more. He'd found purpose in healing, courage in desperation, and love in the last place he'd expected it. He'd found himself, tempered by hardship and shaped by experience into someone he was proud to be. And standing beside Mara Vance, his wife, his partner, his home, Ethan Caldwell finally understood what it meant to belong somewhere. Not because the place was civilized or safe or anything like what he'd left behind, but because anywhere she was where he needed to be. Years later, when settlers asked about the infamous Caldwell couple, the doctor who'd stood against outlaws, and the agent who'd brought down a smuggling ring, Ethan would laugh and say it was all exaggerated. That he'd been terrified the entire time, that his wife had done all the real work, that most of his reputation was built on accidents and misunderstandings. Mara would roll her eyes and tell the real stories, the ones where Ethan had saved her as much as she'd saved him, where a soft-handed dentist had found steel in his spine and stood up when it mattered, where fear and courage had walked hand in hand across the brutal frontier. The legend grew anyway, as legends do. The story of the doctor and the agent, the unlikely partnership that had become an unbreakable bond. People told it around campfires and in saloons, adding details that were more fiction than fact. But the truth was simpler and more profound than any legend. Two broken people had found each other in the wilderness. They'd chosen to trust when trust seemed foolish. They'd stood together when standing alone would have been easier. They'd built something real out of pretense, something lasting out of desperation. They'd survived. And in surviving together, they'd found what everyone who braves the frontier is really searching for. Not gold or land or glory, but connection, purpose, love, and the courage to claim it, despite the cost. The frontier had tested Ethan Caldwell and Mara Vance in ways they'd never imagined. It had stripped away their pretenses and illusions, revealed their weaknesses, and forced them to become stronger. But it had also given them each other. And that, Ethan thought as he watched the sunset paint Fort Resolution in shades of gold, was worth every terrifying moment of the journey. He'd set out west as a fool chasing a naive dream. He'd become a man who'd found his place in the world. And the greatest surprise of all was discovering that his place wasn't a location on a map or a professional achievement. It was standing beside a sharp-eyed woman with a rifle and a guarded heart, facing whatever came next together. The frontier was brutal and unforgiving, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. But with Mara by his side, Ethan Caldwell was ready for all of it. The soft-handed dentist from Boston had died somewhere on the trail west. In his place stood someone harder, braver, and infinitely more alive. A man who'd learned that legends aren't born from skill or strength, but from the simple act of standing up when it matters most. A man who'd found that the greatest adventure isn't conquering the unknown, but opening your heart to another person despite every reason not to. A man who'd discovered that home isn't where you're from, but who you choose to be with. And as Mara took his hand and led him inside, away from the sunset and toward whatever their future held, Ethan smiled. Because he'd finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not a new life, but a real one.